but also the internet. And the last part, like I said, one of the main reasons that people do a project like this is to find out what's realistic for their community or their neighborhood. So this really is based on this idea of retail hierarchy. The larger the community, the larger pulling power, oftentimes the larger mix of retail and service goods that are available. And the way we do this is we do a thing called a retail gap analysis. So again, based on that same trade area and knowing from national statistics how people spend their dollars across different types of businesses, what we do is across 87 different retail and service businesses, we add up people's spending to get to a market potential in terms of dollars spent. And then what we do is we translate that based on the average sales per US store in terms of the number of businesses it would take to service the people in that trade area. And so what we're doing is we're saying, assuming everybody in this trade area spent as people do on average in the US, how many businesses would it take to service those needs if they didn't shop outside that trade area? Which is unrealistic because oftentimes people are very mobile, and especially in a suburban area like yourself, that people are getting pulled to a Stillwater, they're getting pulled to a Woodbury, they're getting pulled to retail all across the metropolitan area. But what we do is, based on that demand, then we actually just do a counting exercise about what stores are already in that trade area, and then we come up with a business gap. We either find a business demand or a supply. So if you see here, this is in its graphical format. So is there a leakage of people's sales outside of the trade area? If so, what types of businesses is the trade area leaking, and so forth. So I'd like to stop there and talk about, if there's any questions just about what it is that we do or how we do the different parts of the market.
Nick, can you hit top and ready to?
Any questions about it so far?
Questions then? I'm good. Just hit top of the mic. Hit top and ready? Ready?
I understand you do most of your work in the outstate. Sorry, the echo's a little weird. What is a realistic trade area for Lake Elmo when we have the metro?
Any questions? Still there?
Try it again.
Hold the talk.
There you go, try again.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, it seems like a lot of this is done in the outstate, and being so close to metro area, having 3.5 million people around us, what is a realistic trade area for Lake Elmo to look at?
Well, I'll hit this just in just a second related to the process, but the way we define, I should back up. We have done some of this work. I'm currently working like with the Corcoran neighborhood in South Minneapolis. We've also done this project in the for West St. Paul as well as for Oakdale. So we have done some of this work in the metro area. And so, yeah, it is a little trickier when it comes to a suburban community where you have a lot of these competing centers. The way we define a trade area, it's a little more art than science, but what we do is we need to define a retail study group of people that understand the local conditions. And what we do is we do a kind of a focus group approach to defining what's a realistic trade area for the community. And a lot of people that are oftentimes on that retail study group are existing retailers and businesses from the community, as well as somebody, say, from the city, people that are kind of informed, local informants to give us a feel about what's a reasonable trade area where they would, a business would pull a majority of its customers.
Okay, anybody else have questions? Comments? Okay.
Michael,
Did you,
sure.
How do you differentiate yourself between what you're doing and what a commercial real estate broker does?
Please say again, that, I just didn't get that.
1, 2, 3. How do you differentiate what you do and what a commercial real estate broker will do?
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's a good question. First and foremost, for us, we're not in the business of real estate development. We're not in the business of putting together pro forma for individual businesses. As part of the university, you know, we're in the business of working with you so that we all learn about what is the market, and then we're able to give that market data to you, and then you in turn, if you so choose, after a given point, hire on some retail consultant or a headhunter who's going to take that next step to actually recruit the individual businesses. But as far as developing properties and finding individual businesses, that isn't what we do. We're essentially nerdy kind of number runners, if you will. So we do the analysis, not the development and recruitment.
Keep moving.
I just have a question regarding your secondary sources.
Information. Where do you, or where do these sources pull their information from that you in turn use to then do the analysis? And is there any reason why you don't use primary data gathering practices?
Yeah, so it depends on which part of I just explained we're talking about. So for example, for the retail gap analysis, the primary database is the economic census. So, and this is the most commonly used database for a lot of people that do market analysis, whether it's me at the university or somebody that does it privately. The stuff earlier here comes from like MediaMark Research. They're a firm like a Nielsen, so they're constantly surveying the whole world and compiling all that information on a national basis in order to get a wider view of types of customers and how customers spend money. And certainly the beginning part, a lot of this is from the American Community Survey and census. So when we're looking at market analysis, your base and most reliable set of data really comes from our federal statistics, whether you're me or you're a private data provider. We have, and in a number of communities currently are, doing a customer survey in conjunction with a market area profile. And that's certainly something that we could talk about. And so what you do, at least thinking about market analysis, if you have a couple of data points are much stronger than just a single data point, right? Because we're looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. And so, for example, right now in, Malacca and Princeton, as well as with the neighborhood group I'm working with in Minneapolis, and then also another community out in Grant County, we are doing a customer survey in conjunction with this, so that you have secondary data as well as primary data. But I know Kyle and another group talked earlier, and it sounded like just doing the secondary data analysis seemed like a good first step and it was most appropriate at this time. So I can certainly talk about customer surveys more in depth. I have nothing against them. I just came here to talk about this.
Any other questions? Where do we go on? Ryan, gonna move on?
Yep, I'll move on. So that's pretty much what the product itself ends up looking like. I'll talk a little bit about both the application. I might just talk about the application and the process that we use. So again, I touch on this a little bit at the beginning, but in terms of application for communities, we really see them fall into three buckets. One is our recruitment efforts, the second are marketing efforts, and the third are really technical assistance efforts. And at least as Liz explained it to me and in talking to Kyle earlier, it really sounds like you're at in this technical assistance bucket in terms of like that second bullet point, using some information. Let's do a little homework and use this information to kind of guide our comprehensive planning efforts, redevelopment efforts of the village of Lake Elmo. So you get a sense about, again, what's realistic for the community, what's realistic for any kind of potential development that's going to happen here, these kinds of things. Again, one of the primary reasons people do this is that are for recruitment efforts, whether it's new businesses or again, relocating other businesses. So this is information that you use to, you can promote this information and use it to kind of drum up interest amongst local entrepreneurs to fill a gap locally. You can also use the information to at least convince regional retailers to enter a market. In terms of national retailers, it gets to be very difficult in terms of real hall of mirrors because a lot of them have their own development group, whether we're talking about a Target or a Walmart or all the like, and have these very finely tuned thresholds that they use, very finely tuned demographic profiles that they use. So they do a lot of that stuff in-house. However, this has been used by communities that I've worked with to recruit maybe a smaller or a regional retailer to enter their community and to open up shop in their community. On the marketing side, again, I think that this is also useful to your existing businesses as opposed to just finding new businesses. And on the marketing front, it can be very useful in terms of, for your existing businesses, to better target customers by a preferred medium, might give them some insight. It could help them change store formats, plan inventory, what are the products that they should carry in order to better meet the needs of their local customer base. And lastly, I think it's very useful in terms of assisting entrepreneurs as a good first step. Here's the information that we've compiled together. As a city, we've done this homework. We've taken it up to the point of doing a market analysis, and that's the point at which you as an individual business or prospective business can take that information and go into a business planning process. Our process for doing this work is really what's most important to us is, again, that we have some type of a local study group that we're able to work with that can help guide the analysis. So we need that local study group of people that understand the local market, that live in the community, that maybe do business in the community, to define that trade area, as we see here that we do at our first meeting. So for the retail study group, we ask for them to meet with us a couple of times before we do a public workshop where we can talk about these results within the business community and as well as with the community at large. So with the local retail study group, we define what that trade area is. What is a reasonable trade area to look at for the city of Lake Elmo? Second, we come back with a draft report and we use that for that retail study group to draft preliminary recommendations. Again, as a person related to the University of Minnesota, I always say, I can run numbers in a vacuum all day long on a spreadsheet, but it's only when those numbers help reinforce ideas that people have locally that you actually have kind of a kernel of truth. I might understand the numbers, but I don't understand, as well as the people that live there and do business there, what's a realistic business for the city of Lake Elmo. And that's why it's very important to have that local input and to come up with these preliminary recommendations. Looking at that retail study gap analysis, knowing what people locally know about what's successful, what's working, and what's not working in the city of Lake Elmo is a great way of coming up with realistic recommendations for the city. This also has the great benefit doing this study group and not asking too much of people's time to engage the local business community with you in a project to come up with what's realistic. Too often, I've seen where a community will hire an outside consultant to do this wonderful, beautiful looking report. However, it was not done with a lot of public input. It wasn't done with a lot of buy-in from the local business community, and then it falls flat, right? And then with this project, a market area profile, an extension educator, in this case it would be Liz, would do a local workshop where we can talk about those preliminary recommendations, have people react to them, as well as just learn more in general about what types of customers live here and operate here, and kind of what is our local customer base. And then finalize some of those recommendations, which is then be included in the report. So like I said, you talk about the trade area. The way we do this is working with the local retail study group to define what is a realistic trade area for the community of your size. So we want to define where community will pull a majority of its local customers. And so we do this, we actually will do this through a focus group kind of mapping exercise, where people will shade a color in across a map. We have a lot of discussion, again, with people that understand the local market to come up with what is a reasonable trade area. And again, this can be a little more art than science, if you will. There is kind of no right way of doing it, but when working with the retail study group, what I like to emphasize is that if we make a trade area that is very unrealistic, a trade area that expands from, I don't know, Scandia in the north to south of Woodbury in the south, you're going to get a set of numbers that don't mean anything. It's going to be very difficult to sort out the supply and demand calculations. It's much better to kind of have a realistic convenience trade area, and to use that to guide and to identify what are realistic opportunities for the city. And that seems to work out much better. So again, I'm going to stop here. I've gone through everything that I need to go through and open it up for questions again.
Does anyone in the audience want to ask a question, a comment, perhaps? I know we've got a lot of business acumen out in the audience and at the table. Todd, has the chamber been, done something like this? Would it be at all applicable to Lake Elmo?
Actually, we've gotten bids, RFPs, from a number of national and Minnesota well-respected retail analysis folks, consultants, and everyone has a different method. The national company uses real-time data, usually from their association and relationships with Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and they're able to pull data in relative real time, maybe it's 3 months old, based on the actual transactions that will take place in a zip code or even a 4-digit extension of that. Needless to say, they're a little more expensive, but there's different ways of looking at this analysis from different rationale and viewpoints of it.
Thank you. I'd like to comment.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Ryan, does the trade area analysis take into account where people currently get those goods and services? I mean, considering we're kind of in a self-contained area, and I would guess most people have their shopping habits already in place, does it take into account where they get them today?
No, it does not. There's no good data source for that. There is one other data source, though, that oftentimes we will bring into an analysis like this, and I think it would make a good deal of sense to do so, are the sales tax data that we can request from the Department of Revenue. We've worked with them a number of times on doing these pull factor analyses. So while the retail gap analysis are really based on secondary data, as well as the existing store base in your area, the sales tax data is very much in-time data that's collected every single year from your existing businesses. And we can certainly use that to get a very accurate number in terms of to what extent are people shopping in Lake Elmo, to what extent are people shopping outside of Lake Elmo. So for example, in some communities like in Alexandria has a pull factor of 4 or something. They pull in 4 times as much data, or 4 times as many sales as you'd expect for the size of their community. And that comes right from their sales tax data, so the data that's being provided by their local businesses. Whereas there's other counties in, say, western Minnesota where 70% of the sales are going elsewhere. And that's good data to define to what extent people are shopping in or outside of Lake Elmo, and to what and where those dollars are going. But it's very difficult to track a dollar that's from this household here is now being spent 20 miles away or 5 miles away in the shop at Rosedale or something like that.
Further? No? Would you like to?
Mayor, I think Todd and I have the same experience. There is a way to do that through psychographics, and through one of my colleagues from the AEDC, which is an Economic Development Association. You take the zip code and you take a look at where people shop. And I have a friend of mine that works for one of the nationals in Dallas that ran that analysis for us as a favor. And we found out that 90% of our shopping, with the exception of cars and some of the other luxury items, happen within a 7-mile radius of Lake Elmo. So a lot of times you'll look 7 to 10 miles out to see what you can maybe recruit or poach from another community, but 90% of our spending happens within that 7-mile concentric circle, with obvious other points, Mall of America, Rosedale Mall, Maplewood Mall, and then Ingrid Grove and White Bear Lake have a little bit of activity from us because there are car dealerships there. So a lot of our shopping happens, 90% of our shopping using our zip code and using those psychographics happen within a 7-mile radius of Lake Elmo.
Okay.
And by the way, that's a very expensive, as Todd will tell you, a very expensive service to be able to buy the whole package, upwards of 50, 60, 70 grand to get that data for your market service area. How much are you, Ryan?
You gotta.
How much is
Can
the
you,
analysis? Maybe you can ask him.
Can you ask him that, Mike? Would you?
Are you ready, Nick? We have a question from an anonymous source in the audience that wants to know how much is the cost of your project?
The total amount as a flat fee to do this beginning to end is $750.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. Well, it's a flat fee. What?
How long does it take to file the data?
Well, maybe we'll.
That's for another time.
Yeah, maybe we just. Could I just?
Other questions?
Unless anybody does, I just gonna, in the interest of time. Could I just? Ryan, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. We probably have some more particular questions. We'll send you. And in the interest of time, we're gonna move on. We appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me. I know it's not ideal for me to Skype in like this, and it's a little difficult for me to kind of stare at this computer screen instead of seeing you all. But I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Okay, thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I think at the next council meeting, we are going to put this on for discussion topic. The intent of this presentation was to introduce the market study, get you acclimated to what I think as staff we're recommending the city move forward with, and we'll have a broader discussion at the next council meeting. And I think if you have any questions individually, I'd be happy to forward those on to Ryan or Liz to get those answered for you if you have any questions about the information that was presented tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll expect some. Up to item 4, how will it look? Restructuring Lake Elmo Avenue, Nick Johnson.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. For those who don't know him, I have met many of you. I am Nick Johnson, the city planner. I am going to ask Jack Griffin, I think, to assist me in this presentation as well. But happy to be here. This is an exciting topic. Downtown is close to all of our interests and hearts. So I do have a small PowerPoint in addition to giving you an update about the county Avenue reconstruction project. So the county was kind enough to provide us with a sneak peek of all of their boards. They will be on display at the upcoming open house at Christ Lutheran Church, 4 to 7 p.m. on Thursday. I encourage many of you who are interested in the project to attend that open house. In the interest of not being duplicative of what they're trying to accomplish on Thursday, I won't go over all of the boards, and I won't get into every detail of what the county project does entail. But what Jack and I did want to kind of communicate to the council as well as the community as a whole, and the EDA and the Planning Commission and the other groups here, is that the county has really started their planning and analysis leading up to this Lake Elmo Avenue reconstruction. And so, how did the city get the county to buy in to do that? Well, they were always going to reconstruct Lake Elmo Avenue at some point. It was in their CIP, as many of you do know. But in the ability of improving the relationship with Washington County, there was a request to move that up in their queue, to move it up to 2015 or 16 to sync that project with the extension of sanitary sewer. So kudos to the folks who were able to get that moved up. And now for this portion of the project, we really want to talk about what is it going to look like, and what are the elements that the city really needs to be aware of as part of this project. Kind of message number 1 is that right now it's really being communicated as a county project. This is a Washington County reconstruction of Lake Elmo Avenue. We certainly have our feedback. But from the staff's perspective, that's really not the correct way to look at it. In reality, this is really a partnership. This is a partnership between the city, this is a partnership between the county, as well as Valley Branch Watershed District. So kind of those 3 main entities are the main 3 driving forces behind this project. So what does that mean? What is the county's responsibility and what is the city's responsibility? Well, the county owns Lake Elmo Avenue, so that's their primary area of interest and where their dollars are going to flow. So all of the other kind of ancillary things that we're looking at doing as part of the project such as this, because this is really the good opportunity to do a streetscape improvement in a downtown area as well as extension of sanitary sewer. So what are the city components? The city components really are that streetscape improvement. It's the utilities. It's that sanitary sewer. It's improvement of the water main downtown. It is the improvements to the drainage. There's lots of issues with surface water in the downtown area, as many of you do know. And it's kind of some of the other bells and whistles that a lot of communities will strive for in kind of one of these revitalization projects for the downtown. So I think the biggest message that we wanted to communicate jumping out of the gate was really this is a city partnership project. The project will not succeed if the city does not supplement the county as part of this project. That's really the biggest message here. So now with that said, the county we are hosting an open house at Christ Lutheran Church on Thursday, so I don't want to get into so much of the details of what the project will be. What we want to actually do is really focus on what are the key decision points for the city related to this project. Because that does affect the EDA, it affects the city council, it affects all of the folks here at the city. So that's what we're going to talk about, and Jack will certainly jump in where he can help me, and he certainly has a little bit different technical expertise in certain areas. So in terms of the key city decision points, we identified some multiple decision points that we think are really going to be the defining features of this project from the city's standpoint. The first one is Laverne Avenue, whether to include it within the project or not. We'll get into these right after this kind of intro. Burying overhead utilities. Administrator Zuliger noted that is a discussion item later for us, so I'll try and not touch on that. I'll try and not go overboard with that discussion item if we are going to be discussing that later. Municipal parking. I think many people will agree that parking might be one of the main challenges to the downtown area of Lake Elmo. So, what is the city's role in trying to improve and provide additional parking facilities in downtown? Streetscape improvements. We really have, I think one of the key jumping off points for this downtown project, and I think it was actually really a helpful tool in getting the county on board with moving ahead sooner, was really this theming work that was done by Damon Farber and Associates in early of 2013. It actually started in fall of 2012 and went over the winter there, and we completed that process in 2013. So now that we have the vision established, we have the pretty picture, now it's really gearing down into the space, the physical space of it, and figuring out where all these streetscape improvements are going to go. And then we do have a couple other considerations, railroad crossing, and then drainage, and then we'll talk about finance. That'll be the segue to Tammy financing the improvements. So that'll be the segue there. Laverne Avenue. So in the scope of looking at this project, it's become quite clear to the staff who has been working with the county as well as the consultants in Valley Branch that the inclusion of Laverne Avenue might be a critical component as part of this project. Now, what are the reasons for that? Number one, the biggest driving reason of why Laverne Avenue, in our estimation, should be included in the project is that Laverne Avenue is the ideal location for sewer. Number one, with locating it within Laverne Avenue, you are actually able to pick up more properties in the immediate downtown area than if you were running the trunk sewer down Lake Elmo Avenue. Jack can get into some of those reasons, more of the specifics of that. But what we found is that a lot of those buildings on the east side of Lake Elmo Avenue are actually served to the rear of their facilities. So aligning that sewer up Laverne is key in that facet. It also would allow for minimized disruption. There's certainly going to be disruption as part of this project. There's always pain with construction. But by taking the trunk sewer out of that really key downtown section of Lake Elmo Avenue, you might be able to cut that construction cycle a little bit shorter and kind of minimize the pain to a certain extent. The number two reason why Laverne, in our estimation, should be within the project is you're really maximizing your efficiencies. You're maximizing, you're reducing costs by working with one contractor. You're going out for bid all in one consuming project, so you're reducing costs that way. But beyond that, you're also doing it all via one public process. More than likely, because sewer does need to be in Laverne, you're going to come back, and if you don't do it all as one project, you're going to have to come back to Laverne Avenue and do it the following year, 2 years from then, whenever. So the issue with that is now you're talking about an additional public process as part of getting out in front of all your property owners, all your taxpayers, and explaining the scope of the work, whereas you could encompass that all into one process. That doesn't have the dollar and cents cost savings like it will at the end of a bid, looking at it that way, but there is all the soft costs of all of your staff working with all the members of the community and doing it in an additional separate process. The number three reason is really to initiate and stimulate, kind of spur some of this redevelopment activity that the city is planning for in its new land use plan. As many of you know, we are adopting new mixed-use zoning in the area, and bringing the sewer to that section of Laverne Avenue certainly would be a good kickoff to try and stimulate some of that activity that the city is hoping for on building and expanding its downtown. And finally, number four, integrate bicycle and pedestrian facilities into the planning of the downtown. As part of all county projects, the county is always going to be looking for ways to integrate other types of transportation, multimodal, meaning bicycle and pedestrian facilities. What we found in the Lake Elmo Avenue corridor is with having those expanded sidewalk areas and trying to really get that nice streetscape is that you don't actually have enough existing right-of-way within Lake Elmo Avenue for any type of trail or on-street bicycle facility. That doesn't mean that people on bicycles certainly won't be able to use that on-street, but in terms of a dedicated striped lane or any type of off-street trail, that won't be in the cards. So including Laverne Avenue might give you the opportunity to create some type of bicycle facility, either to get you up to 36th Street and getting over to the east to Village Parkway or other locations. And I know that the Parks Commission has been very supportive of trying to improve our bicycle facilities as well as try and link to some future regional trail. So that's the Laverne Avenue decision. 2 is overhead utilities. We are talking about that later. That sticker shock, I do have that number, the estimation from Excel. We did get that number. We still are waiting for some other numbers. There's going to be other costs related to burying that overhead utilities, such as cable. And domestic connections are part of that project as well, that will need to happen. But I think the main message here is that in a lot of downtown projects, what you see across the country is they're trying to maximize the aesthetic value of their investment. And when you have all this overhead utilities that kind of take away a little bit from that aesthetic of the plantings, the trees, the landscaping, as well as the facades of your old historic buildings, I think that there is quite a bit of a movement to try and bury that overhead utilities. Municipal parking, this is an important issue for many of the downtown businesses. In order to have a real viable and successful downtown, you can't have that without good, adequate parking facilities. So in terms of, how are these kind of accounted for in other areas in Minnesota as well as across the country, it's very common for the local municipality to take the lead on trying to provide for additional parking facilities downtown. I mean, you're typically working in a fully built-out area. It's not a greenfield type scenario where you have the ability to just create new parking wherever you want. So it takes that role of the local government to kind of either take existing property that they own, which is consistent in our case here in the downtown. We do own some property in that immediate area, as well as try and get right of first refusal on some properties and purchase some additional properties, things like that. But in looking at this issue, there's certain properties that staff thinks would make good opportunities for municipal parking. We can certainly get a little bit further into that in the question and answer session if you like. But we just don't see the growth and the success of the downtown occurring without some additional parking facilities. And another important point about the parking is that, as we do these streetscape improvements as part of the street reconstruction, you're going to have likely a little bit of net loss in current parking on street facilities of Lake Elmo Avenue now. Now you might ask why, but the reason is because you probably have some bump outs to improve some of those pedestrian crossings. You're also going to have all of your spots striped, and kind of right now it's basically a free-for-all kind of type scenario. Whereas you extend out some of these, you do some of the bump outs, you do some of the streetscape improvements, it's likely that you will lose a little bit of parking. So I think it would be the city's goal to have ultimately at the end of the day, if we did look at municipal parking, to have no net loss, but actually a net gain at the end of the day, so that some more of these businesses can get their customers in and out of downtown. Last final point on parking is that a key component of trying to maximize parking, on-street parking, as part of the downtown is that those familiar with the corridor, there's a lot of driveways. There's a lot of side streets. There's lots of driveways in and out. So to what extent can we possibly limit or eliminate some of those driveways? We do have an alley on the back side of Lake Elmo Avenue on the east side, and we do have Laverne Avenue. What are the options to try and get some of the driveways eliminated? Because that does create additional opportunities for parking and creates a more continuous streetscape. When you have those driveways every, whatever they may be, 100, 200 feet, it really does break up that streetscape. So looking at opportunities to do that will be another consideration. The streetscape improvements themselves. Now, this is where we have gotten lots of pretty pictures. We did do the work with Damon Farber. I think it was great work in terms of rallying everyone around the idea of the improvements were needed in the downtown and kind of creating that consensus of the vision. Now is really the time for implementation. So we have Washington County on board with this street reconstruction. Now is really the time for the city to get engaged and determine how to implement this theming and these improvements. So what that likely includes working with a landscape architect. I know that we've already done that with the theming, but the landscape architect in this context would be actually designing the actual streetscape at the end of the day of Lake Elmo Avenue, of implementing these various improvements. So what do these streetscape improvements mean? It means a number of things. It means lighting, trees, landscaping, benches, trash receptacles, bollards, banner poles, all of the things that you think about when you're walking in some of these downtown areas that have a rich pedestrian environment. These are the types of things that we want to look at, and were identified in the theming study as an opportunity. Another thing that wasn't listed up here, but really what the purpose and function of these open houses is really talk to our business owners downtown, talk to as many people who live around downtown as much as we can, to really get a sense of what type of amenities and improvements do they want to see. I mean, they're the ones who really, as being a business, they really own part of the space. They really want to improve it. Getting a good sense from them, from their experience of what types of amenities and improvements would benefit Lake Elmo Avenue would be really helpful. So I do encourage, that's my second or third pitch, to go to the open house and talk to staff if you can while you're there. Then the other considerations, drainage. Jack, if you want to talk about this one, that's more your world. But
Certainly, but it's later on the agenda.
okay, it is, sorry, never mind. So we'll skip that one. The last thing is a railroad crossing. We're just trying to identify what are the key city components of this project. We have gotten lots of inquiries in the past about whistle-free in other areas of the community as well as here. I think the main point here is that if the city ultimately wants to go to whistle-free, that's going to be a city expense. The county's not going to chip in for that. We have taken a look at the approachways to the railroad tracks, and the only way not to have those big gate arms, those type of improvement, is you have to have long, very lengthy medians as part of that and a tangent. And I think the key there is that, so the median isn't really a viable option. You'd be looking at those double gate arms. Those are also very expensive. Those are in the realm of $250,000 for that type of infrastructure. So do you need to make a decision about whistle-free now? I don't think you do. I think the main key for us is just ensuring that whatever the design is for CSA 17 at some point could go whistle-free in the future, so that you don't have to make any changes to the design of the roadway to do the double gate arms at some point. At that point, I'm kind of all finished. It's more question and answer for you guys, kind of around those main decision points.
Thanks, Nick. Nice job. Maybe I'll want to bring the audience if anybody wants to talk about it or comment on it or ask a question. John, you may want to comment. You a little excited about that?
I'm very excited.
Okay, council. Mr. Glapp, would you like to say a few words?
Just a real quick one. A year ago, I talked about what I consider to be the critical factor of parking. I see that's been brought up. I hope that the marketing study that I hope you do includes the fact that in order to make this work, how many spots are needed.
Parking. Okay, thank you. Council, you have a comment or question?
Any sense from the council on Laverne? I think it's
I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it sure sounds like a good plan to partner with the county and the economies of scale and all that, and it certainly seems wise to do. I have no idea on the costs, and I'm Kathy, I mean, this is, I guess, for further discussion. It all sounds great and exciting. It just, I'm a little fearful, but we're gonna go into the next topic, and my fears will be calmed, I'm sure, shortly. But, Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment on the overhead utilities and burying the utilities.
Yep.
I think that, to me, that's a key component of dressing up the downtown. If we're trying to make people want to spend time downtown, it would look so much nicer to have, like, the flower poles in front of Lake Elmo Inn right now. Just how many comments we've gotten about how much nicer that looks, and when you go to other towns, small towns, and you see what has occurred, it is more walkable, it is more friendly, without those overbearing, sagging power lines. I saw the price up there at $276. There's gonna have to be a trade-off, I guess, but I think that this is something that I hope that we at least look at and entertain, because I think that's gonna encourage the feel and the desire to come to our downtown and utilize the new businesses or existing businesses that are there. That's it.
I agree, yeah. Nick?
The one thing I just wanted to add, I know we're gonna talk about more overhead utilities later, or maybe we'll kind of cover it a little bit, but, as Jack kindly pointed out to me, that overhead power, when you have a street reconstruction, to the extent that this is going to happen, this is really your opportunity, is all I'm gonna say. So if it's something that you move forward with, or something that you don't move forward with, and 5 years from now you say, oh, let's bury the overhead power, it's not really a feasible scenario. So just as long as you understand that it's a one crack at the piñata, so to speak here.
Mr. Schultz?
Remember when we put the lights in, we put one or two of them on County Road 17, and they had literally a fit about that, and we had to move them back. But yet telephone poles are buried into County Road 17. Would that not be a benefit to the county as well, to have those power lines buried and those poles off of the plowable streets? Not on all the street, but in front of my place, they're in the blacktop on the street.
Sure.
And that wasn't an issue, but those lights were sure a problem for us.
Okay.
And I understand it, I mean, a plow, they're not that well built, but I just, going back to the power lines, when the street gets constructed, when I talked to Excel, I was under the impression if that street was to be reconstructed, they would put those back up on their cost. But if it was buried, it was the city's cost. Is there no negotiation there with them to partner up with us?
I mean, there certainly might be some room for negotiation, but I think what we've read from the county is that they're not gonna be participating in that. So if the city wants to pursue that, it's gonna be purely at city cost. The Excel, I mean, that's kind of a separate entity, but what we do know is that the county is not gonna be participating in those costs.
Councilman Reeves?
One question, Nick. I know it's way, way early in the process, but when you talk about parking, are you envisioning, or is it possible to envision a above-ground, multi-level, 2-3 stories, underground, surface? What's your thinking there?
I think that in order to drive that type of demand, you'd certainly need to see quite a bit of redevelopment or growth in the downtown area to go vertical with parking. That's very expensive as well. I mean, I'm not a real estate expert per se, but in terms of the cost of real estate, you see where it's lower, that's where you're gonna see your surface lots, and where it's extremely high, that's where you're gonna see it go vertical. Other places that have experienced a lot more demand and activity than us have gone vertical. At this point, I'd be surprised if it went vertical. Maybe something underground, if you had a residential mixed-use project, would be an opportunity where you had some multifamily. But actually getting vertical with a lot, I would be hard-pressed to say that that's likely at this time.
Stillwater did that recently. Can you speak to that?
We have a council member
Next
here.
to Lowell.
I'll defer to Mr. Doug Manikheim's Stillwater City
Stillwater
Council member who
council member
happens to
right
be here.
Put you on the
Right
spot.
next to the Lowell Inn, they put in what I thought was a combined municipal, private entity lot. I don't know if Lowell Inn pitched in on that, but I know that quite a few people use that covered parking lot.
The owner of Lowell Inn donated the land that it was built on. This was done before I got on the council.
Oh.
So I don't know all the details of that, but it's a major part of our downtown that we still have yet to learn how to use.
Again, it's way early. I would just hope that we keep an open mind about the above ground. I mean, I've been to an awful lot of small towns across the country that have 2 levels, and depending on the premium of surface, how much space do we have to house, I don't know, 50 cars, 100 cars? I would just hope that we all keep an open mind.
Yeah, I think everything's on the table.
Yep.
So, it's a good idea.
I don't know if there's any additional questions, but one thing I did want to make a final point before we move on to any future segments is that I do have the project schedule. And so what I'm hearing from Councilmember Reeves is we are early in the process, that is accurate. But in terms of how much time we have to make some of these decisions, it's actually more truncated than we might think. So this is our project schedule. We're right here in March. This first star is our first open house. 2 more open houses are planned over the course of this summer, likely in May and likely in July or August. But I think the key point here is that by September, Washington County wants municipal and county approval to go into preliminary design. So in terms of if we think we have a ton of time to move forward on what these improvements are gonna be, I would say the reverse is true. We really do need to get into that mobilizing phase of what we wanna see from the city side of the project and what we think we can contribute to the project. So September is really that.
And I think, Nick, from a decision standpoint, it's really how many spaces do we need? You know, what's the estimate? And that's we're gonna have to figure that out or have
Yep.
that be part of some work and study. If we need X amount of spaces, they fit in this space. If we need more than that, you know, to really properly evaluate the options.
Yeah. But I mean everything, Laverne, all the streetscape improvements, all those things, so.
You know, on Laverne, just specifically on that, it sure seems like that would make sense. You know, just I'm sure the devil's in the details there, and you'll give us as much information as you can, just so we can chew on these things, as it's going to come kind of fast and
Yep.
furious. So
Yeah, like we said, it's likely that you'll have to get sewer in Laverne at some point in the future anyway to serve some of those properties. So it's kind of wrap it all in one project, and we think save some with, as you said, some of that, maximize efficiencies or the cost of doing business, minimize that, or you do it a couple years from now. And we just think that there's a tremendous value to wrapping it all into this public process, this project.
similar to 39th to some degree.
Yep.
Very similar. Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. Item 5, sorry. How can we pay for it? Establishing a downtown TIF district. Northland Securities, Tammy Amdahl. Please.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And yes, I am Tammy Amdahl from Northland Securities. I would ask, as I go through my presentation, rather than speaking, I would prefer if you'd ask me questions as I go along. So please interrupt me. Dean asked that I come tonight to talk about how you might finance these. And as Nick went through his list of items, all of those items would be eligible costs for something called tax increment financing. And that's what I'm going to focus on tonight. But I would mention, and I understand the EDA and the City Council have gone through and talked about the other authorities of an EDA. There may be other tools that are applicable too as this goes forward, but tonight I'm just going to focus on tax increment financing, but keep that in mind as well.
Tammy, can you do me one favor?
Yeah.
Can you let them know a little bit about your background and why we like bringing Tammy in to talk about municipal finances? Just a little bit. I think it would help the folks.
Yes, I am with a company called Northland Securities. We serve as financial advisor, consultant to the city. But prior to that, I was at the city of Burnsville and served as deputy city manager and worked on the Heart of the City project, a downtown redevelopment project in Burnsville. And prior to that, I was with the city of Minneapolis, and certainly in that regard, I was budget and finance manager for a number of years, worked on a lot of redevelopment projects as well. And really, that's probably a good lead-in to this. And as I listened tonight to the presentation that's come before me, is the challenge becomes paying for this infrastructure before you actually have a project. Because when I talk about tax increment financing for the council, the EDA, and members of the audience, it's really a tool that allows the city and the EDA to capture the increase in local property taxes for a number of years. And there has to be an increase in taxes in order to generate tax increment revenue. That becomes the challenge. The city can certainly use this tool, and I'm going to talk about how it works to finance these improvements. But if there is ultimately no new development, when I say new development, new tax base that's generated, there's no new revenue to pay for those improvements, and then it becomes an obligation of the existing taxpayers. And it's a little bit of the chicken and egg thing. You need to have these improvements in order to make the downtown more attractive for redevelopment. So that's a little bit of my background. I'm going to talk about some of the mechanics because they matter, but more broadly from a policy standpoint. I'm going to talk about the process and how you qualify a TIF district, and more specifically, and Dean, I think, has done some thinking on this and knows the area better, that I'm talking about a redevelopment tax increment financing district. There may be other TIF districts that would be appropriate depending on projects. For example, if there were to be a multifamily housing project that found downtown an attractive area, there would be a different tool that would be more appropriate than a redevelopment. I'm going to talk about the use of tax increment financing. It's not so simple as just creating a district and then spending that money. There are a lot of limitations in state law on how those dollars are used, and actually tax increment financing for anyone. I will stop and take your question.
Tammy, will you just, so we're all on the same page, explain what qualifies as redevelopment? Is it tearing down a building, or is it?
I am going to specifically answer your question in a few minutes. That is a great question, because and that's what I was starting to say. You just can't, with a wave of a wand, say, we're going to create a TIF district there, especially a redevelopment district. There are specific findings that the EDA and the city council will have to go through in order to qualify an area and how large you make that. I will get into that. Great question. And then I'm going to talk about some other statutory factors. And here I'm going to get at, there is a timing issue, because once you create a district, the clock starts ticking, and if nothing happens for a number of years, you've lost the ability in those years to collect that increment, and it will not generate as much revenue that you may need in order to either pay yourself back for loans to pay for these project improvements, bonds that you may issue, or in some cases, agreements with developers. And so with that said, to first talk about where do you begin? A thought for the EDA and the city council, being tax increment financing and redevelopment is new to the city. The first step may be to actually create the project area, and that's something that is required before you create any TIF district, and that is done under development authorities, and the city council along with the EDA, could proceed to do that now. And it is simply defining the geographic area in which you will create a TIF district or TIF districts. In the case of Lake Elmo, I would suggest that that will probably follow the boundaries of the city or be coterminous with those boundaries. In some cases, there are reasons, sometimes political, other reasons where cities choose to define a smaller project area. And project area is different than a TIF district, but that's your first step. So you got to define where you're going to have a project area for redevelopment, and you could do that in the coming months, and you're done with that part of the process. And that is really the tool that allows you to pool increment and to begin the process of even considering the establishment of this TIF district. What is a TIF district? It's really just, it can either be contiguous or non-contiguous geographic area. It's parcels that you identify. And with the redevelopment district, to your question, that it has to be a defined area that meets certain qualifications that I'm going to get to. You need to define in a TIF plan the purpose for creating that. So there's a bunch of steps that you need to go and findings that you would make related to that. And the tax increment that's derived from the captured net tax capacity. So the growth in the tax base is really what you're capturing. That applied against the local tax rates for the city, the county, and the school district. So it is a very powerful tool. To your question on the qualification of the district, it needs to be, for a redevelopment district, blighted parcels with structurally substandard buildings. What does that mean? Well, there's really two tests that you need to meet. You need to make a finding, and this should be not an issue because of the density of the downtown area, but a finding that 70% of the area of the TIF district is occupied by buildings, streets, parking lots, etc. And a parcel qualifies if it has one of those conditions on at least 15% of the area. So that's the first part. I don't think will be a challenge for downtown in meeting. The second test is a finding that more than 50% of the buildings, not including outbuildings, are structurally substandard. And structurally substandard is defined there, and that it is that the cost to bring that building up to the building code is at a cost of less than 15% of the cost of constructing a new structure of the same square footage and type on the site. And that requires actually physically going into buildings, making those findings. Most cities, and my recommendation to you is actually hire this out to have those findings made, those buildings are inspected. If you have an area that has a lot of buildings that qualify as substandard, you can make the boundaries of your TIF district larger and capture a larger amount of increment. But the challenge becomes meeting those two tests when you create the boundaries of the TIF district. So it's not as simple as saying we're going to include the entire downtown in a TIF district. I'm going to pause there on any questions.
Off the top of your head, knowing what you do about Lake Elmo, what do you see the chances are that we would qualify for that?
There may be somebody better in the room to answer with respect to the condition of the buildings, because it's a code issue. And that is part of the process that you would go through to determine that. And part of the give and take is if you're able to meet the minimum qualifications to establish that TIF district and include other parcels that on their own would not qualify, that allows you to capture any future development that would happen on those parcels. If you have parcels that will qualify on their own, you may be looking at several redevelopment districts in that project area rather than one large one. And the reason, and I'll talk about this as well, is the timing. Because once you establish that district and there's actually the first dollar of increment that's generated, the clock has started ticking on how long you can collect increments. So you want to have the establishment of that TIF district as close to the timing of development actually occurring, so that you can have the longest period of time to collect that tax revenue to help pay for the project costs in the area.
The TIF district would just encompass the existing structures for the first contingency. We can't capture any incremental increase in property taxes from any new development on the outskirts of what is the current downtown, correct?
You can, to the extent that you can meet the minimum test. So that's and staff and your consultants go through a lot of iterations on how do you shape and which parcels to include in this district in order to maximize the potential for generating that revenue to pay for the infrastructure improvements.
I doubt, 15%, could lack of a suitable sanitary system have any basis on, could it? Could that be anything?
That would be a basis. There's electricals, there's a whole, process that goes through in evaluating that. You have to make an attempt to actually get in that building. If there is denial to enter a building, a private building, you make certain findings. But in looking at all those specific mechanical and other utilities, as you were mentioning.
Is there such a thing, Tammy, as a new development TIF district?
Clarify a little bit more, because even though you call this a redevelopment, what you're really going after is new development in order to generate those taxes.
If you took a portion of the downtown that's already got buildings on it and say it qualifies, but if you extend it out a couple of blocks, say past east of Laverne into more open space, I guess my question is, can you capture that in a, instead of redevelopment, the concept of developing existing buildings is starting new and having no buildings to speak of in your.
Asking about an economic development tip.
Is that what it's called?
Well, in this city, to do economic development, it would need to be manufacturing. You have to be a smaller city to do it for other commercial uses. But if your question is, if you have, let's say, a bare parcel with no building on it, you can include that parcel in a redevelopment district provided you meet those minimum tests. And that's really the goal, because if you know there's going to be development that occurs on a parcel that does not qualify on its own, you want to be able to capture that increase in taxes in order to pay for the redevelopment costs. And that becomes a numbers game on the parcels and the qualifying factors to see how large you can make that redevelopment district in order to capture as much increment as possible.
Okay, thanks.
So if you have 25 acres, sorry to interrupt, 25 acres of substandard buildings, theoretically you could have 25 additional greenfield acres, depending on how you drew the boundary, as long as you're maintaining that 50%.
Yes, as long as you meet those two tests, that you can have it larger. And that is what you often see with redevelopment districts, that cities are trying to figure out, okay, how many parcels can we include? because oftentimes if it's the easier to develop parcels without a substandard green space, that increment helps to facilitate the other redevelopment costs that need to occur for the substandard buildings. It's very good questions, and those are all point on.
A perfect example of a substandard building, and I don't know if you're familiar with Lake Elmo, but we have a lumber yard, or used to be a lumber yard. All those buildings are just buildings, not suitable for any office or anything. Would that then constitute, I mean, that would definitely be take more than 50% to improve those, to bring them up to code.
If that last part was true, then yes, suitability or obsolete use does not qualify it, but if it meets the substandard with respect to the building code, then yes. Preparing the findings for the use of the TIF, so this gets more into the process that the EDA and the city council have to make some findings as but for, and that relates to that the redevelopment would not occur but for the tax increment financing assistance. Given what I know about the area and the projects, I don't see this as an issue for the city in making that finding. And those other 3 points as well, those will not be hurdles with respect to the redevelopment project that's being discussed tonight and the related costs. A TIF plan is the document that gets created as part of this process, and that's really where it spells out what the EDA and the city, the authorities' objectives are. It lists specific development activities, and it includes the estimated sources and uses of funds. So the mechanics of this, the projects that Nick was talking about earlier, identifying what are those costs, and is increment and showing that increment sufficient to pay for those costs. You have the ability with tax increment financing to either loan money to the district from other city funds to pay for those project costs, or to issue bonds to pay for those project costs, provided that tax increment is equivalent to at least 20% of the bonds. And that would provide the cash flow that you would need to pay for those project costs. And again, as Nick went through the project costs tonight, all of those with, and I didn't hear him mention anything that I don't think would qualify for tax increment financing. You need to spell out in this plan your plans for issuing debt, and you have a ceiling on that in the plan, and define how you will do that, general obligation bonds or interfund loan. You need to set a duration of the district. The maximum duration for a redevelopment district is 25 years. It's a very powerful tax increment financing district because it's a long period of time that you get to capture the city, the county, and the school district taxes, the increase in taxes from that development. You need to call out the specific parcels, and that relates to the findings. So once you determine which parcels, that all gets spelled out in the TIF district, along with some other required information. The EDA, the process would request the city to hold a public hearing. As part of the process, there is a notification to the county and to the school district. There is not, they don't get to veto or approve or deny it, but you do need to provide them notice, and that's 30 days. And they can come to the public hearing and they can comment on your plan, or they can offer written comment on that. Typically where we see the county or the school district weighing in, if there is going to be pressure as far as a housing district on enrollment, sometimes we do county with respect to county infrastructure and roads, because you are capturing those county taxes for 25 years. And if there's a concern that how they're going to pay for related development or pressure on county infrastructure, something for you to consider with respect to this. After that notice and public hearing, it gets filed, and there's a request to the county to certify. And what happens is that tax base, so the value of that property that exists at the time of certification, that becomes the floor. So any increase in valuation over those 25 years, the taxes generated off of that is what gets captured. And it's a long period of time. There is also limitations on the use. So once you've got this district established, you can't just spend that tax increment revenue on any general fund or governmental purpose. 90% of the revenues generated, the taxes generated, must be used to finance the costs of correcting those conditions. So if you established a redevelopment district and you spent it on the costs that were outlined tonight, that would meet those criteria of the redevelopment district. But if you wanted to, for example, spend it on some housing or improvement or some building cost, that is not an eligible use of that tax increment. Given my understanding of what you're looking at, I don't see an issue here. That is, in some redevelopment districts, on the costs that they're looking at financing, it becomes a challenge. TIF eligible project costs, there's a whole list there. The biggest thing to keep in mind, and again, not an issue for you, you cannot use TIF to pay for building costs. So if you had a developer come in and they wanted to put up a commercial building, for example, you could not provide TIF from a redevelopment district to assist with the construction of that building, any of those related costs. That's a limitation to keep in mind.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You were talking about the housing, and if we have the village mixed-use area and we have a building that's part housing and part business, would that qualify?
That may qualify in two ways, depending on what was on that parcel to begin with. So if it was a substandard building, it may qualify as part of the redevelopment. If it doesn't meet and is not part of the redevelopment district, if there is an affordable component of it, it would qualify for a housing district. A housing TIF district has an affordable component. It is not for market rate housing, and it requires, for example, that if it's a rental, that 20% of the units would need to be rented out to persons at 50% of the area-wide median income. And that's over the 25 years, that every year that manager of that building would have to qualify that to the city. But sometimes I'm seeing more of that, actually working on that, where cities are describing it more as market rate, but because of the product that it's on its own, meeting those qualifications where their target is maybe teachers or of a certain income level, that the rest of the building is marketed as market rate, but yet it qualifies for the TIF district, a housing district.
So for instance, a lot of the seniors that are in their 70s, 80s, 90s here that are on fixed incomes, I would assume that 20% of that building could be filled with people residents that live here that just don't have the income, that just have nowhere to go.
That's correct, and I've actually worked on a few of those where it was TIF district housing and it was restricted to seniors, and that's possible too. You, as the city, can put those criteria in those development agreements as well. They still have to income qualify those residents once a year.
But it's 20%.
It's 20% of the units, yep. The other 80 are market rate.
So if we were to establish a TIF district in the downtown area, we have these eligible projects. How does this work? Is this like an agreement we set forth with, and say we decide we just want to use it for one installation of utilities, roads, sidewalks, and parking facilities? Is that something that we as this council set up this TIF district, so therefore we've outlined the parameters, or it's something over the next 25 years where people can pick and choose, and at year 24 decide to buy who knows what?
How this would work, because you don't have, it's a little different because you don't have a project. I mean, you don't have a developer in here saying, I want to build this building and this is what it's going to generate in increment. So we would go through and estimate out what future development may generate, and I'll emphasize the word may generate in tax increment. And you are still able to move forward and create, assuming you meet those qualifications, let's make that assumption, to create that redevelopment TIF district. Where the challenge becomes, now you have the authority, and you can go out and you can either do interfund loans or you can issue general obligation bonds. But unless that development actually materializes, you're not going to generate that tax increment revenue that you need to pay back those bonds. And then it becomes an issue or a challenge for the city's entire tax base, because you would still be meeting those debt service payments.
Well, see, that's my fear, is that we would establish this TIF district and not meet the revenue that we
Need to cover the bond.
exactly need to cover the bond, And are we able to be specific about what the TIF district would be used for if we were to move forward? Can we say, this is what it is?
Yeah, you do that in the project plan.
Yeah, that's what I mean, okay, so
Right at the front
we
end.
can do that. at the front end.
You would, and with my opening comments, it's a little bit of the chicken and egg thing here, because you are trying to facilitate these projects and the financing of them in order to help improve the infrastructure in downtown, in order to attract that development that you would like to see. But yes, there is some exposure that that increment would actually be generated and sufficient to pay back whatever you issued as far as obligations.
So, if we're gonna do let's just assume we're doing a sewer project and we're gonna create a TIF district. And to Councilmember Bloyer's question, the city's paying for it no matter what. So our risk, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but the risk is, because we're paying for it, the taxpayers would pay for it if we didn't get any new development. So that would be the risk, is that the taxpayers would pay for that bond. If we get the revenue in, then the taxpayers would be off the hook.
Yes.
But it's my understanding that by creating the TIF district, you attract people to want to do that development because there's some kind of help for them to get their project going, and once that project's going, you're hoping that it builds the momentum to bring in the other projects, which in the end, all support the whole downtown.
That's correct. It gives you the tool, because absent this, for example, you might be saying, if a developer was coming in with a project, okay, but we have all these public improvements we need to do, so we're gonna have to special assess you for those, or you're gonna have to pay these fees. In this case, the increment would be providing the funds to pay for that infrastructure, and you would be, for lack of a better term, setting the table for development to occur, but you need that development to happen in order to generate the revenue.
Can you give me an example? I don't understand. What is a, what's the right word? I got one, but that's not it. What is it we would offer to a business coming in through TIF?
Infrastructure.
Well, I mean, aside from infrastructure.
It depends on how much increment is generated. If the plan, when I talked about sources and uses, if your plan shows all of the increment being spent on paying for the public infrastructure, you're not gonna have anything left unless development occurs above and beyond the projections in the original plan. If that's not the case, if there is some gap there or additional increment, you would be able to look at agreement with that developer in providing tax increment payments to them versus the city paying itself for that infrastructure. But given the magnitude of the infrastructure improvements that you're looking at and the fact that there's not a specific development project initially, I think the assumption is going to be all of the increment is going to go to pay for the public improvements.
If the increment, if it goes over the expected increment, we don't continue to capture that. Did I hear you earlier where it says that goes to the district, that goes to the state?
You do actually, and you have a period of 5 years that you have to obligate all of the projected increment. But if you collect more increment than you've incurred in project costs and you have a TIF plan, a budget that allows for you to spend those dollars, you could consider the question on giving an agreement with the developer to offer some additional assistance in order to achieve another city objective that you want with that private development. After a period of time, and I'm not going to get into the details because TIF, it's too complicated, you are right, you start to have to return increment to the county and get it redistributed. That's a different workshop.
You said earlier that in the event we wanted to help a contractor or pay for a building out of the TIF proceeds, that we could not pay a contractor any of the TIF proceeds to develop a building. Is that correct?
That is correct, and so you might say, well, what you said, Tammy, is in conflict. What you could pay, if a developer came in and said, it's gonna cost me X to tear down this building, I have X in earthwork, those costs are eligible. You just can't reimburse for costs of the physical building. So any of the earthwork, soil improvements, those are eligible costs that you could agree to use TIF to pay for.
So in that fashion, you can then turn around and use that money to entice a developer to come in and build a building of his choice, or something we would approve, to entice him to bring it in and develop it, because then you've got an incentive for him to do it above and beyond, again, provided we have an extra amount of TIF that we've received. But so, it's not totally fair to say that we cannot take part of the TIF proceeds that we get to help a developer or build a building. We can't build a structural building, but we can help a developer come in and make it inviting for them to build something within the city. Okay?
And generally, it's site plan, site prep, drainage, those kinds of things. You know, previous TIFs I worked on, we provided dirt from public projects that we recaptured. There's a lot of different things you can do. It just can't be for the physical structure.
One thing that
Remediation as well, right, Tammy?
Right. One thing we didn't get into, because I was focusing on the public improvements, the EDA certainly can also do land assembly and land acquisition using tax increment revenue, and then the conveyance of that land to a developer at a price that is bought down by the tax increment. So those are other tools. I focused tonight just on the public improvements, but there's other authorities that the EDA would have to act under.
And that's one of the incentives. If you designate a TIF district, and you say, okay, I want, initially what you want to do, if there's any criteria that don't meet what you need to exercise your TIF district, then you want to lump it all together, because now you can put parcels of land in with buildings that are substandard or need to be redeveloped. The detriment to that and the downside of that is if you initially put a large TIF district together, and then you've got criteria on that whole district, the downside of that is that either it's too big for a challenge for you to immediately meet, you don't take care of the part of the TIF district that you need to because it's so big. And that's why if you've got an area that you want to designate as your TIF district, sometimes it's better, correct me if I'm wrong, to have a TIF District 1 adjacent to it, TIF District 2 adjacent to it, TIF District 3, if you believe that each district on its own can hold its own weight to qualify as a TIF district. Because then you run a less chance of not satisfying the original TIF, because you've got a smaller amount of land and criteria to take care of. And then once that takes care of, and provided you do a good job of the original TIF, then you can add TIF 2, and now you've got a different set of timeframes you have to deal with as well. Just want to make sure everybody understands that going forward. So although you'd like to put the whole city of Lake Elmo in a TIF district, so you can develop this parcel and that parcel and take advantage of the tax increment financing or tax increment you'll receive by improving taxes, what you've done maybe is bitten off a bigger chunk than you can chew, and that's not the right way to do it.
I agree with those comments. You are right. I think the challenge here is going to become sizing that district properly in order to generate enough estimated increment in order to finance the improvements.
How many districts can one city have?
There is no limit on the number of districts. It's really the ability to qualify those districts.
I'm just gonna take a minute, just because I had heard from the council, who was that? That's John, the gentleman just spoke, John Thompson, EDA, or EDA members, John Schultz, EDA member, Dan Rowley, EDA member of Lake Elmo, and of course Todd Streety with the Chamber of Commerce. So, anyway, please proceed.
The last comments that I wanted to make, and they actually tie in nicely to what we were just talking about and the timing of this. After the district is established, within 3 years, and this point isn't up there, something needs to happen in that district. You need public improvement, you need to issue bonds, something. Once you do that, you're past that criteria in the statute. The next criteria that hits our rule is within 4 years on each of the parcels in that district, something needs to happen in order to keep them in the district and the ability to generate revenue. And that can be an adjacent street project, a utility project that happens along, that's adjacent to that parcel. It can be the demolition of a building. For each parcel, the point being you have to qualify it. So another reason that there's a challenge on timing of when you establish the district and when something actually happens in that district. There's the ability to do pooling. That's a less of an issue here because you have a high degree of public improvement costs that you're going to be dealing with just within the boundaries of the district. And the last point, and an important one, you have 5 years from the date of certification of that district to obligate not just the increment that you would have collected by that point, but the increment over the life of the district. So that won't be a problem if you immediately are paying for all those public improvements and you have the life of the district. It becomes a challenge for districts that are more project development focused and nothing happens in those 5 years and none of those funds are obligated. That it's a consideration. I would just mention there's currently a bill being introduced that's going to extend that 5 years to 8 years. Whether or not that gets through the legislature this year, I don't know, but they're looking at potentially extending that time period.
Thank you. I've got, kind of got an impossible question, I suppose, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, just to give us some idea on what kind of numbers we're talking about. Any idea on what that increment could be, additional value, what taxes it could generate, what kind of monies it could fund in relation to a bond, so we can have an idea on what this might be able to pay for? Is it?
Can I ask a question of you?
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, we've got property right now, and we establish a TIF district. And in that TIF district, we're collecting, for simplicity purposes, we're collecting $100,000 worth of tax.
Okay.
Okay? And forget about the fact there may be a building on it, forget about the fact there may be a blank piece of property, forget this parking lot, forget what's on it. We're getting $100,000 now in taxes off of that original TIF district that we're looking to establish. And so we estimate, based on a plan that we all put together, and say, this is what we're gonna do to that TIF district, this is how we see it getting developed. We're gonna bring in sewer, we're gonna bring in water, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna bring a contractor in, he's gonna build this building, and we're going to improve a couple of the existing buildings, and by doing so, either we're going to ask the current owner of the building to pay more taxes, or we're going to establish a situation by where the current owner can get more rent for their building, and therefore increase the tax base. So that's going to increase our taxes, that's the difference. And now we're gonna collect $500,000 in taxes. Again, these are big numbers, but I'm going big. So the difference, difference is $400,000 in taxes that we are estimating to generate, okay? And so that's our TIF money. That's the increase. However, that $400,000, part of that gets paid to the county.
Nope,
No.
you
Okay.
get it all. That's the nice part about it.
And we don't have to pay anything to the school district?
You get
No.
that portion too.
So, and how is that different in Lake Elmo than other spots that you get all of the TIF? Because typically, if we're increasing that, typically, doesn't part of it go to the county and part of it go to the school district?
It does if it's not within a tax increment district.
Okay. All right.
The original $100,000 in taxes,
Yeah.
that's the base. The county and the school district share in that. Anything above the base is the increased increment, and we get, for purposes of economic development or redevelopment, we get all the tax pie for that to pay off the obligations we have in the infrastructure.
So we get the $400,000 to spend
On redevelopment, on the,
redevelopment.
yes.
And $400,000, and remembering that $400,000, if we even increased it by $400,000 a year, we're getting that every year to pay down the infrastructure, which is how you're going to try to determine what kind of a TIF setup you're gonna have to try to answer your question somewhat, provided all this happens in a reasonable period of time. Remember, your 25 years starts once this gets into play, and how quickly you get that up and going and actually achieve the extra taxes on that space. My next question is, real quick, and not to complicate things, but if we get all of that $400,000, and let's say part of our TIF money that we've moved on to TIF District Number 2. And part of TIF District Number 2, we've turned into a nice little walkway area and some shops and everything else, and as part of that, we've also made multifamily housing, because that land that we've included in that originally, now we've decided somebody's gonna come in and build houses, and that's good for us because that's an additional tax base, plus it fuels the rest of the businesses we're doing here. In that instance, and now we've got infrastructure of roads, and we've got a bunch of kids now going to school, does that then change what the school district and county can come and get an additional TIF? Because now the use has changed to multifamily housing, we've got the infrastructure of roads that the county would own, and then cost of sending kids to school.
No, it does not. It does not.
This is good.
Mayor, back to.
Some would say that's good,
I'll
that's
Candy,
for
real
sure.
quick.
Yeah.
Some communities where there is growth that happens and you're adding more kids and more roads will retire TIFs early to get that money back to the school districts. I've seen that. I don't know if that happens in Minnesota, but across the river, if your TIF's performing and you paid off all your debt, you'll say, okay, we'll retire the TIF early because now we've got all these kids we wanna be able to serve and we need to build schools and those kinds of things. So you wanna be able to work really closely with your county and with your school districts to determine what kind of growth you have, so you don't negatively impact their budgets. So, that's just your tax dollar coming out of another pocket.
And I wasn't trying to complicate anything there, but it goes to your question somewhat as to how do you determine how much tax we're going to increase and how much of that tax we actually get to keep to pay off the cost of infrastructure and sewer and water.
Mayor, back to your question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll tell you what'll happen, how we get the answer to that, is working with planning staff and going through each of the parcels, and there would actually be a process to say, okay, what type of development does the city see here on these parcels or parcels? What type of density? And from there, we would calculate out value of that and estimate the increment. I just don't know that sitting here today as far as density and what increment it may or may not generate.
And so some of that was shops with housing above, it would be partially commercial and partially residential, correct?
Whatever the city's plans are would be reflected in there. And again, because there's not a real project in hand here, that's the process that we'll have to go through and say, okay, here's the map, here's the parcels, and this is what the city envisions is going to happen here, and this is how we're gonna estimate the future increment that may be generated.
In fact, Kathy just left, but we already have generated that map.
Yeah.
And have looked at it, and this was done by Nick Johnson on my staff, but we've already kind of looked at what a TIF district might look like, and we can kind of drill this down into individual districts. And with this, we've already determined the base value, and we would just kind of go and take a look at what the redevelopment costs might be. So we're already kind of preparing for that, and kind of this has been ready for about 6 months.
And that's exactly the process,
Right,
yep.
so-
Is the timeline for these, for the bonds, when we talk about maintaining our credit rating and all that, we talk about shortening up the life of the bonds, is that, and we talk about the TIF is allowed for 25 years, just curious, does that have an effect on the
As far
bond
as
rating,
the term of the bonds, it will depend on how much increment is generated. And let's just say that there is sufficient increment and allowing you to stay with your shorter term that you like. It may or may not be the case. It may be, and I'm just speaking hypothetically, once we finish going through that work, that the cost of the infrastructure project and the TIF, they don't match, meaning you'll need other revenue sources, which we would then talk about in order to help supplement and pay that debt service. You would still have the authority to issue those bonds, but you may need other revenue sources other than tax increment from the beginning that you would be pledging or putting towards those bonds.
Council? Anybody questions, comments? Mr. Gorman?
How about the fiscal disparity part that commercial people pay? Does that benefit the city?
That's a great question, because I didn't cover that. With the redevelopment district, the EDA and the city make an election that either the district will pay for fiscal disparities, will be paid out of the district, or not. And you make that at the time you establish the district. There's some districts you don't have that choice, meaning it automatically fiscal disparities gets paid from the district. With the redevelopment district, you have that option. And what will happen is we will show you, okay, how much increment does it generate if you have the district pay for the fiscal disparities, and what would that be if you cause the rest of the tax base to pay that fiscal disparities?
Another piece of the puzzle.
That is correct, but if the election is that the district is not paying for fiscal disparities, the contribution is still the same. It will come from the overall city tax base. So that is a consideration at the time of establishment, but it's a great question because there is an option, there's a decision that will have to be made at the beginning.
Mr. DeLapp?
If I can be corrected on this, my recollection was that back in the 80s and 90s, when property values were going up 8 to 15% a year on the assessments, cities were factoring in the assumption that every year, every building would go up 10% in value, and that would be a substantial amount more going back to pay off the TIF district. Then there was a problem, and the people weren't paying that kind of interest. Property values weren't increasing that much, and suddenly their projections were falling very short. So the state changed the 15-year limitation on TIFs to 25 years to try and help bail out the cities that were not going to make it. Right now, the interest rates seem to be really low, so it would be a lot safer to get into this thing and have the projections over the 25 years. Is that correct, or is that wrong?
I maybe heard two questions there. First, you are correct that when the district is established, there are assumptions made on future valuation growth. And sometimes cities are very aggressive on those assumptions, and sometimes they're very conservative and assume over the life of the district that there's no growth in that value from that new development. To your question, have cities gotten in financial difficulty related to their assumptions on TIF districts? Yes, when the assumption on that valuation growth was high, and especially through the economic recession, and did not generate the increment. The third point for housing districts, if it was owner-occupied housing, those districts are now challenged because of the market value exclusion program, which I won't go into. It just means there's less taxes being paid by those properties compared to what was projected. Those are all considerations. There's always risks when you do that, but it is the EDA and the council that will review those assumptions and say, we feel comfortable with those assumptions that we have in our TIF plan.
Thank you. Well, thanks a lot. Very interesting and a nice presentation. Could we maybe take a quick break, 5 minutes, everybody?
Right back.
You guys are on the ball, man. You already figured out valuation.
Cities.
type of planners is that they're really disorganized. And papers all over their desk. But right now, the hatched area is the mixed use. So along Lake Elmo Avenue.
I'm gone
all the way
too.
over towards that is that designated mixed use. There is this area of these existing homes. There has been some discussion
Let's just
at the
start the
planning
meeting.
commission level as well as some
I'm
council
leaving
members.
first. I'm leaving
Staff thinks it makes sense to do that, to make those mixed use as well for
I'm gone.
future redevelopment. But there is gonna be,
We did.
Thanks all, we're all back, we're back, we're back.
existing use is
Joint
done.
workshop, the council and EDA and
Disallowed.
assorted group of interested citizens.
Use, it would allow
I'm gonna take the privilege, to just I asked Mr. Zuliger, just to, in a nutshell, describe why we are interested in forming a TIF. What's the benefit, the average person listening at home, what's the upside of it? Why are we doing this, and what's the advantage if we're successful at it? Would you, Mr. Zuliger, just describe?
The purpose of TIF is to use the taxing authority without affecting the entire community of taxes, just in this regional area. And, you know, Mr. Thompson explained it pretty nicely in how you use the difference between the base tax value that's already there and the increment you create. And the increment that you create pays off the infrastructure debt, and it's only within the district. So if you're inside the district, any increased value over the base pays the infrastructure debt service. But if you're out, let's say we're doing this downtown and you're out in the Tri-Lakes area, you don't pay for the TIF district. The TIF district pays for itself. Unless you've done a poor job, and we won't, poor job of kind of estimating the growth within that. And then you have to use what's called the quiet enjoyment of the community. You have to use the tax rate to pay off the debt. I've got experience with 3 TIF districts. I know Tammy's probably got 20, 30, 40 TIF districts. It's very seldom do you have a distressed TIF district. And, you know, my understanding of the lengthening the district wasn't necessarily to bail out tax districts, but it was to allow for more time to redevelop, because those first few years are kind of difficult. So now I have got a developer's agreement that I've shared with everybody that also, if you do these developer kind of related projects within TIF, allows you, my agreement basically puts a developer has to put up a letter of credit that you can draw on until they create enough increment to cash flow the TIF. And I've showed that to Tammy, and I've showed that to others. So there's a lot of different ways to put a safety net underneath TIF borrowing so it doesn't affect the entire tax base in the community. So, and like I said, it's the redevelopment TIF, the one that I like, that I think that we can qualify for, 25 years, capturing the 3 different kind of taxes, school district, county, and the city, is a powerful way to really do some of the things we want to do downtown. So now, I think that Doc brought up, and I think he left from Cedar Pet Clinic, he likes the fact we're looking at this right now because the county's gonna rebuild the road, got all these things, that we're bringing the sewer up. It seems like there's some economy of scales in being able to do this all at the same time. So that's why we're kind of bringing this to you systematically tonight, because we have been able to move the project up in the queue, thanks to Commissioner Gary Kriesel. And we were able to kind of time all this at once, so we're not ripping up roads and kind of piecemealing the infrastructure together. We can kind of do this all at one time, and TIF is a good way to maybe do that so that the taxes don't have to raise for the individual businesses, so. And your taxes in the district don't go up unless your value goes up.
There you go.
And that may happen with the provision of sewer, so.
Thank you.
Is that
Yeah,
what
that
you want?
captures it. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, up next, who can help? Strategic Partnerships, Alyssa McLeod, City of Lake Elmo. Alyssa.
Mayor and members of council, I just have a brief introduction to this strategic partnerships in downtown development. When working with a project like this, you of course want to get buy-in and support from as many stakeholders as possible, which includes business owners and property owners, of course, Chamber of Commerce, financial institutions. You're also including the consumers that are going to be shopping and supporting that area once developed, local government, and then service organizations and different committees within the community. And that's just a small list of individuals that you'd want to reach out to form partnerships when going toward development. I'm just going to discuss a couple different kind of means to organize those partnerships and bring them together and into fruition. And the first is business improvement districts, otherwise known as BIDs. What a business improvement district is a public-private partnership in which property and business owners elect to make a contribution to the maintenance, development, and promotion of their commercial district. So it's a lot of maintaining it and promoting it, marketing it outside of the area to bring people in. Business improvement districts deliver a range of services in coordination with municipal services. So any services that the city is already offering, the bid does not replace that. It adds supplemental services on top of that. But these services invest in the long-term economic development of the district. They're governed and operated by a steering committee, and that would ideally be composed of stakeholders within that business district boundary, so including some residents, primarily business owners, and then of course city officials as well. And the business improvement district is funded by assessment to the property owners within that district, within those boundaries. Some good attributes of what a business improvement district offers: cleaner and safer, more attractive downtown, so they kind of give a means to upkeep them, keep them looking good, maintenance. Steady, reliable funding source for supplemental services and programs, the potential to increase property values, and then also to increase the traffic and improve sales for downtown businesses, so to drive people there, and that would have to do with the marketing component of it all. To get a business improvement district established, you would start with selecting the steering committee. You'd probably go out then and do a needs assessment and get a database of the entire property addresses within the district. Do the needs assessment, and off of that, create a plan, and then you do public meetings and get it through legislation. The other thing I'd like to talk about is some additional programs that actually work in conjunction with business improvement districts, or can, not necessarily need to. Main Street programs. The Main Street program was established in 1980, actually as part of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And then in 2010, Minnesota adopted their own program, the Minnesota Main Street program, through the Minnesota Preservation Alliance. And it's a program that uses a 4-point approach on organization, which is collecting that buy-in, collecting that support, getting people on board, getting them engaged, promotion, marketing, design, that'd be kind of the streetscapes and what it would look like, and economic restructuring. They are also based on 8 guiding principles: comprehensive, so collaborative; incremental progress, making small steps, so even small projects will make improvements to the area; self-help. The purpose of Main Street programs is to really not serve as the entity to get things going, but to provide the support and resources needed for the city and community to keep it going. Public and private partnership, like you already talked about. Use of existing assets, quality, change, and then action. So it's really important, especially with the last of those principles, with the change in action, to get that buy-in and establish strong partnerships from the very beginning. Main Street is actually a membership-based program, and as I mentioned before, they provide technical and financial assistance, training, and resources. That's a big part of what they do. They give you access to a membership network and then marketing benefits. If you're actually chosen, you can apply to be a designated Main Street city, and if you're chosen for that, along with that, you can use that as part of your marketing, that you are a Main Street city, which is really beneficial. There's also an option to be an associate member of this program, where you pay a fee and then you can have access to the training and resources, but you're not an official Main Street city. One thing too to keep in mind with Main Street cities is a lot of what they're based on is historic preservation. So it's dealing with historic downtowns such as our Lake Elmo downtown and revitalizing that. And then funding sources for this would be the city government, memberships and sponsorships, so member dues of people involved with the Main Street program, fundraisers and product sales, so it could be with including events in the town that would raise funds for this. Product sales, that's like creating t-shirts and things that kind of have the city branding on that you would sell in local stores and shops. And then retail and service fees added into, maybe, I'm not really quite sure exactly how those fit in, but, and then with the Main Street programs, these, like I said, the Main Street program is an official established program, but to be a part of it, there is a pretty intensive application process. There are fees involved, but following this basic structure, community involvement and strong partnerships and kind of the model that they give, you can form organizations similar to that. And that's where I'd like to lead into Mr. Todd Streeter with the Chamber of Commerce, who has led the community symposium effort. And then also in Stillwater, currently they're working on the Downtown Revitalization Committee and have been doing a lot of work very similar to what this Main Street program outlines, but they've kind of done it independently. So I'll turn it over to him to tell you about their program specifically and what they've been doing with that.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Alyssa.
Alyssa.
Mayor, Council, this opportunity to collaborate is kind of a new thing for our world and country and state and even our municipalities, pretty much programmed off of the economic recession that we experienced some time back. Cities just don't have the resources and the horsepower to really do the things that I think cities really, really want to do. And unfortunately, business owners and property owners and residents don't always have the horsepower to do the things that they'd like to see happen within their city. And silos and all the things that have happened before really kind of stood in the way of trying to do great things for our communities. The community symposium started off with the initial intent is to harness all the resources that we have in our own backyard. And that is really expertise, willpower, financial resources, and really try to bring communities together through their own means. And the symposium kicked off in 2011, and we held a series of, open houses or city town hall sessions. And we were able to come up with 20 pages worth of ideas from both the business community and the residents. The panel, made up of 4 mayors, council members, and organizational leaders, reviewed that list and then came up with 6 economic categories that merged most of those ideas, so forth. We chose the first one to kick off, which is downtown revitalization. I do have a handout here for you. Those 6 categories, I should mention, were increased communication, celebrating arts and culture, community transportation, economic redevelopment, increased access, and community amenities. What we needed to do is have the symposium panel kick off the first project to instigate, and that was chosen to do revitalization. And Stillwater was the project due to the lift bridge being converted to a pedestrian bike path 2017, the completion of the St. Croix Crossing Bridge 2016, the Browns Creek Trail coming online this year, and Lowell Park improvements. With the new bridge, approximately 73% of commuter traffic will disappear from Main Street. And that poses opportunities, and it also poses some challenges. But the opportunities is that we will not need turn lanes to go across the bridge, either left or right, which means that we could actually start to entertain the idea of having wider sidewalks, trees, benches, and a lot of things that are absent downtown. The challenge it poses, though, is do we take it for granted that our residents will come down to downtown once the bridge is closed? Do we take it for granted that people are going to hop off the freeway a mile south of downtown Stillwater and patronize downtown on a whim? There are some people who believe that will be the case. Fortunately, a lot of people realize that we have an opportunity to shape the future of downtown and create a vibrant, economic, resilient downtown
for decades to come. So that was the mandate of what the DRC, or the Downtown Revitalization Committee, was pretty much charged to do. What's interesting, though, is what Main Street does is the same thing we're doing, but we're not doing Main Street. We kind of took this task on through our own effort. And I have to admit that previous efforts have been made to do improvements for downtown, and when I asked why they didn't come to fruition, they said because nobody wanted to do the work. So in this collection of 40 people at this meeting in September 2012, I said, well, that'll be the difference, is we have to do the work. The city won't do it for you. Consultants won't come in and do it for you. It's up to us, all of you, to define what you want your downtown to be. And the difference between success and failure is defined by what it is that you all collectively come together to accomplish. So to start that process, we kicked off 6 subcommittees from that group who focused on very specific opportunities for downtown Stillwater. Business mix, amenities, or I should say ambiance, riverfront committee, a biking committee, a parking and traffic committee, and a branding committee. All of these committees then had their own respective research and work to do, and the ambiance committee came forth with a presentation from all sorts of ambient lighting, facade lighting, bridge lighting, natural amenity lighting, features within the north and south part of downtown Stillwater, and made that presentation to Stillwater City Council. From that work, we were able to engage 5 architects within Stillwater to be on a design team. They decided to put their competitive nature aside and work together, and last night they completed their project. They took these ideas, along with other ideas in transportation and biking, and put together a wonderful booklet that will now be brought forth to City Council and staff for their input, review, and we'll just keep nurturing that forward. What we've been able to discover through this process is that downtown Stillwater is 150 years old, and a lot of people take it for granted. City takes it for granted, residents take it for granted, shop owners take it for granted, and we're not in an economic position to do that anymore. On one particular Saturday afternoon in September, I went around and I took pictures of every single building that was for rent or for lease within the downtown district, and that was 23. I spoke to a gentleman who, as I was putting our art fair together in the fall, he was painting a building right next to a lot that we were using, and he was asking me questions about the art fair. And I said, so is this the first time you've been to Stillwater? He said, yeah. He's about 40 years of age. And he says, yeah, this is my very first time, just today. I said, really? What do you think? He goes, you have a lot of building spaces for lease here. That's unfortunate, because if that's a visitor's first impression of downtown Stillwater, we have a problem. So it took a while, quite frankly, to start to draw attention to this, because we're passionate about Stillwater, we're passionate about the River Valley area, about all of our 4 cities. But to get past that, we have to look at it honestly. And that took some time for this Downtown Revitalization Committee to go through that process. And we had to look at some certain things that may have been a little challenging for them, but they got through it. And what they've been able to discover is that they've been able to work together and really start to understand more of the dynamics of what it is to make a downtown vibrant. We have approximately 123 individual property owners in the downtown district and about 243 independent businesses down there. So we have a very dynamic environment which to work in. But what we have, though, is an opportunity for everyone to gather together, to have the city become involved in this process. They are actually forming a project team with the Riverfront Committee and looking at transient docking opportunities and prepare a grant for the DNR for August 1st. So we're actually building bridges, not just the big one across the river, but we're building small bridges all along Main Street. And it's an evolution, it's a process, it's certainly not over, but we've come a long way. The other nice thing about this arrangement is its ownership. I've put together a symposium presentation about the purpose of the symposium,
And there's two ways of looking at things. You can have a city-driven process or you can have a community-driven process. The symposium is all about community-driven process. And that's where you harness, again, all the resources. The greatest thing that comes out of this whole process is that you have community ownership. And I think Ryan touched on that in his first presentation, is that you have to have community input. The question is, and it's all based on scale, of course, but is that input 1 or 2 times, or is it over 18 months in terms of the DRC? That input over a long, long period of time creates that ownership of their work, and it really changes the complexion of that whole product and that working relationship that you do gather and get through the city, the business community, the residents, and so forth. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for all involved. I think they're learning more than they ever thought they would. We now, with this illustrations from the design team, downtown is having to look at the parking issues. We have a lot of parking issues, as all cities do. So the learning curve never stops, and the community is actively involved in understanding what all that means and what those opportunities are. I could talk all night about this, so I'll just kind of cut it short, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time regarding this process.
Also? Well, I'll just say, I know I was very modestly involved with your symposium, but I know you're doing yeoman's work and really invested and dedicated to it, so I applaud you for that. What's the Stillwater downtown? Would you care to talk about some of the struggles that the buildings face down there, and maybe the perspective that you're offering? That'd be all right.
Well, I describe Stillwater downtown in particular like a Rubik's Cube. It has so many different moving parts, and it takes a long time to try to figure out how to get them all aligned. But it's a very dynamic environment. But some of the challenges are just long-held beliefs, quite frankly. Obviously, we get an awful lot of tourists that come downtown all summer long. The merchants, the businesses, they all depend on that revenue. However, I think wishfully thinking, on October 15th, they'd like to see all of a sudden all the residents come down all the way through May 15th. It doesn't quite work that way. They believed in it, that process or that model, and I think we finally got to a point where they realized that just doesn't work. The mantra for the DRC is create a wonderful downtown, period. Not for residents, not for visitors, because you cannot serve 2 masters at one time. That marketing plan, that model, never worked, it never will. Just focus on creating the best downtown possible. The other challenge is, because it's so tourist-focused, when we talk about the notion of the economic viability, that really took a while for it to sink in. Because in many respects, some didn't see a problem. But when you realize that businesses can't make it through the wintertime because you're a seasonal location, you have an economic problem. So, and it's twofold. It's circular, because if you can't have businesses downtown that are drawing consistent, qualified consumers on a regular basis, you are going to have seasonality. So the objective is to figure out how do you have an economic base of quality businesses that are staying open till 8 o'clock, who are merchandising their products, have very educated people on staff, and really trying to really make a consistent go of it for the whole downtown. And it's a challenge because we have independent business operators, and they're free to run their businesses the way they want, and they're all hardworking. I'm not taking anything away from that. But we have one business that's closed all winter long in the middle of the block. And it's taken a while for them to realize that's not helping downtown. And so there's a lot of debate going on, and an awakening as to what constitutes an economic viable downtown.
Thank you. Thanks. Anybody else like to comment or questions? Thanks, Todd. It's good food for thought. How can we access some of the information your group have come up with?
Well, we produce a lot of stuff, and this outline is just starters for it. We are now working with the Stillwater Area Foundation on a grant to help motivate and move this process along to the next level. We did talk about economic studies. That's part of that process, so downtown can really understand where its leakage is, economically speaking, and who is that active consumer that's buying on a regular basis, as opposed to passive consumers. So there's a lot of work cut out for us. But the one document they did, and it took them 18 months to create it, was the DRC One Vision, One Voice, One Outlook for downtown. And that really is the mantra for why they're doing what they're doing, what the rationale is, what the problems are downtown. And I think some of that may be synonymous here with Lake Elmo as well, challenges being similar. But that's a document that we use for two reasons. One is we use it to write more grants with. That's our basis of our rationale. And then we also use it to start to educate the other 100 or so people downtown that need to be part of this process in the near future, so we don't have to re-educate so much.
Have you looked at what, probably, I don't wanna say your biggest competitor, because they're not really in competition with you, but they're very like you, and that is, what does Hudson do to keep themselves busy 12 months a year, or do they flail in the winter as well? And secondly, I'll let you address the first question, but I'm gonna get my second question out there. Have you thought about something, I lived out of state for some time, and is seasonal, hockey town, or excuse me, hockey, I got hockey on the brain, ski town. You know, there was local events, local discounts. Do you use, or has the business ever been willing to say, I'm a Stillwater resident, so I can eat at this establishment between these months and these months on a 20% discount or whatever, to try to pull in that business? Because I certainly use Stillwater all the time. When I'm not at Lake Elmo Inn, I'm at the Green Room or Mark's or, you know, the Shanghai Bistro or whatever, because I don't go very far. That's where I go if I'm not here. But just from my experience 20 years ago, that was huge. Does Hudson do that? Could Stillwater do that and pull in those people? You know, you say that the businesses are saying, well, we'd like to think that all the Stillwater residents would come here the other 9 months of the year. Then entice them.
To your first question.
Yep.
Hudson has the benefit of actually being pretty contained in terms of its geographical footprint for downtown. And they've had those trees, and they've been able to really do a nice job enhancing their downtown experience. They're also, and have been, I believe they probably still are, the fastest growing county in Wisconsin for the last 10, 15 years. So they've had a dramatic explosion of population, which has obviously created an economic boon for downtown. Unfortunately, we're hearing, and I'm hearing from people, is why can't we be like Hudson? And that's kind of hard to hear that. But I get what they're saying. I totally get it. And I was asked that same question too, and I said, well, the problem is you've got 8 blocks worth of downtown. And so our ability to keep that contiguously vibrant and involved as you can with 3 or 4 blocks in Hudson is a much greater challenge. But that's the challenge that we have before us. To get to the second question, it's about unity, I think, in the long run. There have been many, many attempts to have business owners stay open till 8. A lot of people work till 5, 6. And we get phone calls, you know, how late are these stores open? Well, you'll have to just check because I really can't tell you. If we can go about doing what we're set out to do, and we start changing mindsets and attitudes, and we start getting people to kind of coalesce and think of downtown as a collective nature of businesses and not as an independent store operator, we can go a long way to getting them to start to play ball with one another and start to stay open later and work on uniformity in terms of sales during the wintertime and come up with other ideas.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Strudy, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
We're gonna move into those last 3 items
Right.
fairly quickly.
But right now,
We're just gonna touch very quickly on the overhead power issue, and Jack's got a slide on drainage.
overhead power. Nick?
So,
Yeah, I did touch on, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I did touch on this a little bit in my previous presentation, so I think we're probably pretty well covered there unless there is specific questions. But as I said, we did get a ballpark estimate on burying the overhead power, the Excel side of the utilities, and that was at the 276,000. So that might go up, it might go down. That also doesn't include some of the domestic connections, but I think we're still waiting on Comcast and some of the other utilities, so that will increase those overall costs. And as soon as we have that estimate, we have requested it. As soon as we have it, we'll get it in your hands, certainly. But generally speaking, a lot of other downtowns have taken the step to try and improve their aesthetic, the corridor that is their main street, which is Lake Elmo Avenue in our case. So, you know, generally speaking, the overhead utilities are mostly on the on the west side of Lake Elmo Avenue. There are a few sections, but you do have some wires that cross Lake Elmo Avenue in a few smaller instances, but generally speaking, it is on the west side. Unfortunately, if it was on the east side, you could maybe try and serve those businesses via Laverne Avenue or from the rear of those buildings, but we don't have an alley on the west side. So in terms of trying to just relocate, that's probably not a likely solution. It probably would have to be bury or just leave it in place. If you did go the leave it in place approach, there might be some ways to try and change the aesthetics of those poles. But again, we would have to talk with those easement holders, the utility companies, if they're, if that's acceptable to them. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, you can try and disguise them with some aesthetics, paint or whatnot. But generally speaking, as I said before, this is the type of improvement that you have your one shot at, and either you take the shot and you figure out a way to pay for it, or you don't take that shot. And the likelihood of doing it 5 to 10 years down the road is not very good, given that this is your opportunity with the entire road torn up and having a multi-year stage project to get those improvements or get those utilities underground. So I guess that's the crux of it.
It's only $29. Just saying.
And we'd all pay it just to have the power on a little bit
$29
more
per
often.
That actually, Dan, that brings up a good point, and John, to your point of I'm sure that there is some creative ways that we can think about trying to generate some additional funds to try and pay for that improvement. But to Dan's point, there are certain types of businesses that do, Jack brought this to my attention, do need a more reliable source of power. Undergrounding the power is a more reliable source of power than the overhead utility. So that would be an ancillary or an additional benefit to going through that process. There certainly is quite a bit of administrative, in terms of working with those utilities. I understand it can be somewhat challenging, which isn't terribly surprising, I guess. It's, making them underground, all those things can be a substantial effort, but if it's something that the council feels is in the best interest of downtown, it's something that your staff is more than ready to take on that task. So.
I certainly think it's the interest of downtown. I get the aesthetics, not to the degree that perhaps you do, but I see the value in that. But if we had to vote for it tonight, without TIF, without a grant, without anything, I'd have a hard time voting for it. It's well over 10% of our annual budget, our tax budget. So I guess I'm throwing it out there to say as we approach the day, if we make the assumption we may not find these other sources, if there was some type of partnership between the business district and the city, and maybe something else. We should parallel that. What's that?
Said the residents benefit from the power being on too.
Yeah, I haven't known that to be a problem, but clearly it is.
We're out for almost 2 weeks, I think, or whatever it was last.
Oh, from the storm. Yeah, good point.
It's the overhead power lines, not the storm.
And it's what you're saying to your community with what you just said, Mayor, that if you had to vote tonight, you don't see that you could do it. You know the numbers, none of us do. But it's saying that you're willing to pull and cut corners. And are we gonna do this project right, or aren't we? I mean, we haven't done anything in my 30 years here, gone backwards. It's time to do it right. It's time to take a stand and say, I'm proud of this town, I wanna make it the best it can be, and we gotta do and use the right tools. Yeah, it's gonna cost something. It cost me something to rebuild the BFW, a lot. I would have fit in that TIF program, by the way, it was well over 50%.
There is a retroactive rider.
No, I don't, but.
I'm gonna throw my view out there
Are you
because,
done, John?
Yeah, I'm done. I'm just saying that it's something that, it's a statement that we're saying to our citizens that we're out to do the best we can for this town. And to say that we can't, because right now, again, I don't know the finances of the town. I just know I know what I pay, and I say it's time to make a statement.
and I agree with that. I think it's, you can do things, half-baked, or you can go all the way. And I've said this for the last 10 years, which is why I'm sitting here today, and I'm gonna get on my soapbox for 30 seconds and say, I'm here today because I have worked on the old village since the onset of the comp plan in 2005 and then 2006, 2007. And I've said it and I say it over and over again, and you'll probably read it tomorrow. We have a chance in a lifetime. Development has stopped from 2007 to this point. We've been able to figure everything out. And now we can move forward and either do things spectacularly or, And I think for the businesses that we have here and for the businesses that may come here, we should be looking at, 50 years from now, someone saying, wow, the council at that time was really thinking what they were doing because look at what they have. Look at what they've done. And that's my soapbox. You can do it right or you can do it not right. And I want to make sure that, we do it right for all the people that have been fighting for this for so long. And I've only been here for 10 years on the council, but there's a lot of faces out here. You've all been here. You grew up here. You've had your businesses here for 20 and 30 years. You deserve that opportunity. And I think Todd would agree with me, right? That, if things are done right when they're supposed to be done, it alleviates some of the headaches down the road.
No, I am a proactive thinker, just kind of by nature, and it's a challenge. I'm a former mayor, so I understand the civic responsibilities and limitations sometimes in the mind, the things that go on in that discussion of spending money. I will just refer to Lowell Park in downtown Stillwater, and the city spent an awful lot of money redoing the north end of Lowell Park. What they didn't do is take down the telephone poles. And we had a discussion about that at one of our DRC workshops as we were brainstorming all these opportunities. And it turns out, of course, that it would cost roughly $1 million to pull all those down. But I have to ask myself is, well, what if that was done 15 years ago? So, somewhere along the line, something always kind of gets up and like a stone in your shoe. It'll just kind of nag at you for a long period of time until you figure out that you got to do something about it. And that's a challenge. It's a hard decision sometimes to make. But I think maybe there are creative ways of getting to that point. And I was listening to Alyssa's BID, and we're familiar with that in Stillwater as well. That realistically will probably be something an instrument that we'll have to look at once we get to the backside of all of our improvements. So then downtown can maintain itself and be a steward of downtown within their own autonomy. So coming up with money to make things happen, that's always the challenge.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I'm here to help.
I just want to, thanks Todd, and thanks Ann, and thanks John. I just want to be candid with you. I've got several locations, I've paid assessments, I've done the build-out, I have sympathy for you, and I know the businesses pay, in my opinion, an undue amount of taxes. So I fully get that, but as we approach that day, it'd be unfair of me not to say, convince me, convince this council, perhaps consider doing something else. We talk about the business coming together and, maybe showing that investment. That's all I'm tipping my hand towards that, but hopefully it's not an issue. Hopefully these other things we've talked about will come to fruition. Council wants to weigh in, then please do. But
Just that you built a great team here. This is the city staff, outstanding. Council,
Agreed.
I'm really optimistic for the town, and that would just be a giant step backwards. And I know it's financial, but again, $29 a person.
I'm gonna take the last word unless somebody else wants to, or you can give me a retort. It's boil, I mean, we talk about the trails, there's millions of dollars on that. There's all these other things that, rise or fall, we're gonna have to choose from them. And, this meeting is very interesting, entertaining, and it's fun to think of, but it scares the heck out of me. I'm sure it does all of us. So that's my 2 cents. And
Now we're really gonna scare you, cause Jack's gonna talk about drainage.
excellent segue there. Did you want to say something?
No, you already did. I would
Okay.
just add, let's all keep an open mind.
Right,
And don't get
absolutely.
entrenched anywhere. And I think we all want the best things for the downtown, and we have to be creative and figure out how to pay for it.
Amen. Jack?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm just gonna stay real high level and real brief with drainage, but, we all know there's a lot of drainage issues in the downtown, and the water's coming, really, we have a lot of, everything that's happened in the downtown, there's no real defined drainage system to handle it. Water's being contributed from city roads, city properties, it's being contributed from state highways, it's being contributed from county highways, it's being contributed from schools, all the private properties, so we're kind of all in this together. And as we move forward with your downtown, we have to create a solution and define the solution that we can build to. So as projects come forward, every project gets built that takes care of a piece of that, and then it kind of builds together and works together. So that's, in a nutshell, how we're going to attack the drainage. The first step with that is there's with the CASA 17 project, the county and the city have partnered together with what we call a regional drainage study. It's for the village downtown area, but it's not gonna cover the entire village. What it really is it's focused on the heart of the downtown. But essentially, the county, as we come up with a design for the downtown street, we have to put storm sewers in place, and they need to shed the water from that. And of course, water's coming from outside of that right of way, and water will have to go somewhere. So the stormwater solution that'll be part of that project will have to be bigger than just that corridor and bigger than that project. So right now, that study is investigating the current problems, getting to understand the issues as part of that. And then we'll be trying to define first a bigger picture solution, but then what will the first specific project look like that'll start to build toward that. At that point, the county will probably step aside, and that's where, getting back to Nick's point that he started this meeting with, is this needs to be something that the city then supplements. So once we kind of once we receive that drainage study and those proposed solutions from the county's drainage plan, we'll kind of then have an idea of how far they have to touch and what kind of system they'll be trying to put into place. And then we'll have to pick that study up and broaden that to the rest of the village and come up with that bigger picture plan of how the rest of the village is going to fit into that. So that way we're working with the county, and we can see that when they move forward with a solution for their road, that it fits into what we would then do with subsequent projects. So it's very early in the game right now, and that's just, but as we come this spring, they're out there looking at the snow melt now. We have a good snow melt to witness, and if we don't know what the problems are, we'll see them again this spring. But we're a couple months away from being able to start to see what they see as a proposed solution for the first phase of the project, and then it'll be time for us to pick that up and start to supplement that study with one of our own that broadens that scope. But in general, I kind of put up here what the stormwater solution's going to be. And really, what I see it as at a very high level, the highest level sense, is sort of a three-phased approach to it. And I got here site-by-site compliance. And what that means is, as you get farther out, so the newer land that's being developed, when we have those developers come in with housing develops, you get the bigger parcels being developed at one time. Stormwater can simply be accomplished on site, on their development, within the scope of their development, just like the Lennar development, just like they are at other points in the city. And they do that just by complying with the current regulations and rules that are in place. So the city has a stormwater management ordinance. We have to abide by the Valley Branch Watershed District rules. We also have to abide by the state rules. And the state rules became more stringent in August of last year. Valley Branch rules in order to be in compliance with the state, made their rules more stringent. The city's rules point to those rules as we need to comply with those. And as each development comes in and they begin to build stormwater ponds and facilities to meet those rules, it'll be improving. Every one of those developments will be improving the stormwater situation. We have developers now that are talking about starting in the north part of the village rather than the south, because the water's all flowing to the south. And if you start at the north and they start to manage the stormwater on the north side, that'll keep improving the situation and letting less water downstream as we go. So site-by-site compliance, when we do these larger parcels, that's how the stormwater will be managed. So we don't have to define the solution today, we just know that when they come in and define it, they will present their solution on their parcel. The second part of this is what I call a regional stormwater facility. As you get closer into the downtown, the heart of the downtown, you get into the business district and you have mixed-use housing, things like that, a lot of zero lot line type development proposals. So if you're taking down a building right on Main Street and putting one up, they have no land, no availability to meet stormwater regulations on their site, and starting to put ponds and things like that on a site where you're having a downtown and a parking lot and things like that, it becomes very difficult to meet those. And how cities address downtown areas generally for that purpose is you build a larger facility for the whole downtown area, and then as people rebuild or redevelop in that area, they sort of just plug their pipe into your street pipe that goes to that regional facility, and they pay a fee. So the way that that's a lot of times handled is through what we'd call a stormwater district. So one part of the solution will be defining one subset, one part of your downtown that's applicable to this, that we would create a stormwater district. The city builds a regional facility, and then anybody who connects to it pays to connect, similar to your sanitary sewer SAC charges, and it becomes sort of a self-sufficient enterprise fund. So that's the second part of what the solution will look like at some point, and that's the bigger part of our study of what we have to define is what does that regional facility look like. And then the third piece of this is what I call innovative stormwater management. And this is another place where you have an opportunity to take some of these stormwater ponds and try to make it an amenity, try to make it something creative. Stormwater reuse, that's something up in Centerville, they did a downtown project. They have ball fields nearby. They collect the water, they capture it, they use it as irrigation on the fields. They reuse the stormwater. Stormwater reuse, stormwater recycling, finding ways to use it to replenish the aquifers, things like that. So there's lots of different innovative techniques. There's grant funding out there if we come up with some of those solutions. So we'll be keeping an eye on those kinds of things as we come forward too. But between these three, it's really sort of the high-level plan attack, and then this spring we'll get started on the details of that, of trying to better define what that may need to look like.
Thank you, council. Anyone?
That's good, thanks.
Thanks, Jack.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Councilmember Bloyer.
I don't mean to digress, but Todd, you had said 8 to 9 blocks in Stillwater. What is the transient traffic during the summer? Do you have a number on that?
I know that the bridge count, for example, you're talking about automobile count? Or-
Automobile and tourist.
Tourists I can't speak to at this point, but we are requesting to have a pedestrian study done this summer. Vehicle traffic, the bridge has about 17,000 vehicles going over it per day during the winter months, off-season, and in the summer months it can be as high as 25,000 a day. That's an awful lot of cars going through. I also want to, top of my head, MnDOT has a program called SIMS. Are you familiar with it? It may apply to complete streets and other types of projects that the city may be entertaining. We had a meeting with MnDOT officials maybe 3-4 weeks ago on this topic too, because we were looking at being able to perhaps, like I said, do wider sidewalks. And they've got 2 programs, but the SIMS program is 100% funded by either state or federal.
Somebody got that? All right. Thanks, Don. Good?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, we are up Village Green. Councilmember Smith, I think, has been asked to.
I want to kind of, first of all, quickly talk about drainage, and then I'll segue into Councilmember Smith here. You want to give me the full view here? Drainage, by the way, is considered by most city administrators as the most expensive thing you do. Storm pipe, moving storm water is just always the most expensive thing that you do. So there's another cost component to this that we don't have quite sorted out. And by the way, we do have community participation in that we've talked to Mr. Shilkin, Pete Shilkin, and he's going to partner with us so that we can kind of capture some of that water from the north on the corner there across from Ed's place. And we'll kind of do some retention facility, maybe a pond, pretty sizable one, that we're also maybe going to use as kind of an amenity as you come into the city. You know, you're not going to want to have algae blooms and things like that, so maybe a fountain that splashes to keep the water oxygenated. So even Mr. Shilkin's kind of basically is coming, no swans, Paul. But you know, we've already kind of worked on some of these supplemental projects, and then one of the things we're hoping is in this reuse and recirculation of stormwater, we can daylight that water and maybe create a water feature similar to what they did in Burnsville, so people can kind of enjoy that. So as we work into the Village Green discussion to kind of end the night, I wanted to talk about a couple of things so that I can set you up here, Councilmember Smith. And one is that the green and the notion of a green as a sense of place is in the comp plan. So we addressed it in the comp plan as something that we think that would be a nice feature and a sense of place in downtown Lake Elmo. As the old village work group looked at the different components of a green, the business community kind of came to us and said, if we're going to do a green, if there's going to be a sense of place, we want you to keep it as close to Lake Elmo Avenue as possible. So as you've probably already seen tonight, we've got a pretty creative guy on staff named Nick Johnson. In fact, my whole staff tonight has just done a great job, and these two guys have been here now both nights past 10, or going to be going past 10 o'clock. So I want to applaud the planners for hanging in there these first two nights. But we took a look at the possibility of where a green might be able to fit, and where you see the dotted white line here is all land that the city controls, with the library, the fire department, the old park building, and then those two red spaces are spaces that we don't control. But just take a look at this land, and maybe Councilmember Smith can kind of talk about the dream a little bit, because I think the dream is the essence of the Village Green. This is land that the city has control over, and we have a downtown. Most communities try to create a downtown out of something. Go to Apple Valley. I love the mayor of Apple Valley. She's my buddy. But go and look at what they tried to do with the downtown there, and it just didn't work. Okay, it's just not a downtown. We have a legitimate downtown, and we've got control of this land. So the two things, the notion of a green is in the comp plan, and we're trying to stay comp plan specific. What?
Parking.
What? What'd you say? Parking? Parking. Nick just keeps saying parking over and over and over to me. Parking. All right, we've got some parking opportunities here with this land. And we control a lot of land downtown that could be vital in the creation of a central sense of place. So with that, I'll step back and turn this baby over to you, because I know it's your baby.
You know what, I didn't even know I was gonna speak tonight, but I will say just a couple things, because I wanna get out of here and go spend some time with my family, as all of you do. Last night I watched a show on TV, it's called Resurrection. I don't know if any of you saw it. Goofy show about people coming back to life that have been dead for many years. But what's interesting about that show, and if you have a chance to watch it, is that the little boy who came back to his family, his mom and dad 32 years later, was from Acadia, Missouri. And all of a sudden, on my TV, I wanted to stop it and take a picture of the green that sat in the middle of Acadia, Missouri, if there's really an Acadia, Missouri, or whatever town they used for that. It was just, you felt warm and fuzzy when you saw it. Like, I want to be a part of that town. We've all seen shows that have that sense of place. You know, the Michael J. Fox and the Fast Car movie, same thing, big town square. When the Village Group put together, and the old Village Plan came about in 2007, there were 13 guiding principles, and laid out in there is this notion of a village green. The village group over the last couple of years made an error in judgment, thinking that we could put it on the backside of what was going to be hopefully some senior development where the lumber yard is. And we were corrected, and rightly so, by the business community, a few of the people on Main Street, and even a couple of the council members who said, it's too far away. Why would you put your downtown and everything centered around there on the other side? And my first thought was, well, because that's what we did. My second thought was, they're right. And in looking at it in the space that we controlled, it's grown on me immensely, because when you look at these other towns that are like Acadia or Kennebuck, Maine, Kennebuckport, Maine, or wherever it is, you're gonna see that the downtown is not just one specific street, it's generally several blocks around that street. And we have that opportunity, which is a neat opportunity. With that, we also own the VFW ball field, and to assure Mike, I mean, funding is going to be a big component of this. We can't just willy-nilly go out and do all this stuff. But to look at the process that's been gone through with the hundreds, thousands really, of residents and the dozens of meetings that we've worked through over the past 9, 10 years, it's always been the community, the residents that live here want a walkable downtown with a village green, a center, a gathering space, with a farmer's market, maybe some water feature. I was hoping a pool someday. That seems to be unrealistic just because of the expense. But Dean Zuliger had said in Weston, where he came from, they had these spouts that come up, and you see them. Elk River has them. So you're walking in Elk River, and you'll see just on the sidewalk, kids playing in that water. That's a simple thing to do, probably a cost-effective thing to do, to bring people down to that village green area. Having that village green area and the community that's around it, and yes, you'd have to move the ball fields, but I've been assured by the people that play ball, they're okay moving the ball fields, as long as the new ball fields are up and running before we take down the ball fields that they have. They just don't want to have no place for several years. So there are things that are going to have to be talked and worked through. But if you can imagine around this area, if you had housing here, some type of senior housing complex, which they're very interested in doing at the lumberyard, with business underneath and business all around that area, and that's your gathering space, along with the central corridor that goes to that Main Street. Because frankly, that Main Street, I think as time goes on and as we get all this new housing in the old village, is going to be a very popular place for our residents to come. Now, Todd could argue that, Stillwater wants their own residents to come down to that area. They're talking about a 9-block strip of Main Street. This almost is better in a sense that it's compacted. So I just want you to think about what the future could look like with having a space that anybody in Lake Elmo or wherever they're from could come and gather in. That's it.
What size do you see the village green being?
Well,
Encompassing
I
all
would
this?
think that the roads would have to be, and I'm not Jack. Jack's the road guy. But I'm thinking that you're gonna have to construct the road so that you could have angled parking, or maybe parallel parking, whatever it may be, you have to provide parking. If you go into areas that have these type of centers, especially on the East Coast, you have angled parking, and it's fabulous. But that's gonna, when these roads are built, you're gonna look at how to build them to accommodate, people coming down to use that space. So, I don't know, that might shrink the actual green space, because you're gonna have to be able to accommodate people. And I always thought it would be nice to have one of those really expensive 2 or 3 decker buildings where you could park in, but I didn't realize, as Jack said tonight, that it was that expensive to go up. Or did Nick say it's that expensive to go up? We, in 2006, 2007, Mark Putman did some work on what a building would look like that was really a parking facility that looked like an old building. It was really cool. Again, those are amenities that all have a price tag, and I don't know what the price tag is, and that's something that's gonna have to be worked out by the council. The goal is to get a place that this community wants to come and visit, eat at. Let's go to Lake Elmo Inn or Joe's Ice Cream Shop or Bill's Pizzeria or whatever it is, and spend their dollars in their own community, because actually it's a neat place to go. And Stillwater, to me, I always say, I have a little mini Stillwater here. It's a great example of a really great place to go. If I didn't move in 20 years out of my big house in Lake Elmo to the downtown in my little townhome that I'm gonna have someday in downtown Lake Elmo, I'll tell you what, I'd be moving to downtown Stillwater. But I'm hoping that this whole plan comes to fruition, so that I can stay here and my kids can stay here and my grandkids can stay here, and all of the people that have lived here for so long, the Raleighs, I look at all of you and you've been here forever, and you desire to have your family with you and stay here forever. So that's it.
Just to comment on Justin's question, they're all over the place. Acadia, we were out in Northern California in September, and anybody that's been out to Sonoma has a beautiful town square, village green, pedestrian mall, and they're probably a square block, 2 square blocks, and I know our blocks don't quite match up, but the ones that I've seen ideally are surrounded with activity. You know, and so, again, I would say and agree, the closer we can get it to where the action is, probably the better. But, you know, a block or square block or 2.
And I give credit to John Schultz for speaking out on that, because I wasn't thinking on the village group of what's there, it's what could be. But I think he spoke on it, and Wally and Justin spoke on it, and frankly, I think they were right, that it has to be close to the space that's already there. We already have a downtown that people love. People come to the post office, people come to the restaurants, people go to Gorman's, that whole area right there. It's a great place. So.
Council questions, comments, anybody? Nice job.
Thanks, Mike.
Mr. Mitt?
The one thing I would add to defining the size, I think what you really want to do is define what activity you want first, define what the amenity is, and then I think you kind of start there, and that's how you figure it out. The other thing I would add is that, in part of kind of looking at some of these properties, sorry to be a broken record, but part of that effort was also to think about the potential for municipal parking as well, some opportunity for that. So I said it.
I like parking.
3-story building, right where that old Parks building is? Right there on the corner, services that whole area? Not a
That
bad
would be
thought.
nice. That would be very
That
nice.
would be very nice.
Parking's important.
People aren't gonna come to your downtown unless they can conveniently get to and from everything.
Yeah, I think parking's important. I think the walkability and being able to really service both is important. But for the businesses that are there now, maybe it's more exacerbated because of the snow, but parking on Main Street's tough.
How big was the green space in the village plan that I've seen, the previous one?
Anybody that wants it, the city can get it to them, either through me or through our village committee somehow. It was finished about a year ago after 4, 5, or 6 iterations.
Right.
Which was, just as a aside from what Ann said, we really didn't want, we thought that if we touched Lions Park, we'd get shot. It turned out that that wasn't the case at all, so we were very happy to move in there, but it took a psychological break to make that. So we have it all laid out. Lions Park, which is about 2 acres, is the size that we're talking about. It's very common all over the United States for a 2-acre plus or minus village green. Most compact cities have them like that are, certainly if they're old, or if they're real new or real old, they have them. And we have parking all the way around. Ann already said we've got potential for shops all the way around on 4 sides. It's a wonderful gathering space that we can send you. When you go much further beyond the village square, it's imagination at that point.
I just kind of struggle with it because it's malleable. I don't know what I'm either supporting or opposing, or, is it that's the first first recommendation on how big it's gonna be. And if it's 2 acres, then it's parking. And if shops go around it, we get, we're not, we've got some for lease right now, so I just, if that's, I don't know how to, you say it's in the comp plan, okay, well, it's in there. I guess I'd look at it that it's probably something that could, in my opinion, maybe come to fruition at some point. And it could be one of our wants, at some point, once we get some rooftops around here, once we get some of the infrastructure done, once the businesses that we have, kind of regroup, maybe. I don't know, that just, but, if you tell me it's 68.5, well, okay, I just don't know how to get my hands around it and do something with it, either to approve it or say, hey, let's go. You talk about moving the ball field, well, that's a pretty significant effort. And where does the ball field go? All these meetings, have we flushed that info out?
Our
So
committee
if
addressed
you
all those
have, then
issues.
let us know. What's that?
We submitted it last year.
Where the ball fields are gonna go?
Sure.
Yeah, but that's already come to.
It's actually in the comp plan.
Isn't it a non-starter based on some drainage issues we've got? So, but if that's the plan, then okay, we can talk about that. Okay, so if that,
several areas that
okay.
ball fields could have been in. We didn't specifically in the group say the ball fields had to go here, because we didn't have the data from Jack to where they could work or not work. And
Right.
so it was just kind of but you want them somewhat close, because you think about having a couple small ball fields and a couple big ball fields. The ball is big here. I mean, Lake Elmo baseball, St. Croix baseball, these guys are going down to the tundra at, Lucy Winton Bell. And you know what, to have a few fields right here, and then to be able to say, come on, Billy, let's go have an ice cream cone, or a burger, or pizza, and feed the economic, component of a downtown is amazing. And those people come. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
So would the
So-
city be better suited to have multiple ball fields there than a village green?
Well, where would you put the businesses then?
I'm not putting
Yeah, I get-
businesses anywhere.
So those are some of the things that we can kick around before we give direction to the council, I guess, or to the staff. Did you, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that we all remember that we have to take care of our existing businesses, and that, that's why we had suggested bring the Village Green close to Lake Elmo Avenue, but we just always got to keep that. In fact, these guys have been here a long time. As the mayor said, not every building's full. We need to help these businesses and landowners succeed before we expand businesses beyond that. It's just, my ultimate point is we need to make sure we take care of our own.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say, and somebody had said it before, we needed to really decide for the Village Green. I love the concept. I think it adds to the sense of place and the sense of a destination and a gathering place. I think we need to decide for what. What are the things that are gonna happen on that farmer's market? There's things like that, gathering space. It could be more open and flexible instead of doing a lot of frisbee, walk your dogs. There could be a lot of things there. And I would just say, with all due respect to the work everybody's done, it may not need to be 2 acres. It may need to be something smaller that fits. I mean, I just look at that, and if it is indeed 2 acres and it's all of that park, that kind of dominates the landscape. And it shouldn't dominate it, it should complement it. And so,
I think you're right, Mike,
Yeah.
and I think I touched on that when I said that, in order to fit, streetscape and angled parking, you're not gonna have that whole 2 acres, because you're gonna have to accommodate what business you may, you may have along there. And so,
Yeah.
there's options. This is a 25, 30-year build-out plan. It's not let's build it tomorrow. It was
Right.
always that way, that we knew that it would take time to come to fruition. The idea was that you can start something and progress little by little and make something come to fruition, that somewhere down the road, people say, I like what they did. And you go to a lot of towns and you can say that when you are in, wherever it may be.
Yep.
What a great little town.
Sonoma, Sanibel, I mean, go pick them.
I just want to say the thing I took from this meeting was Hudson, for instance, 3 or 4 block area, and they apparently have a successful downtown. I can see 3 or 4 blocks right there, and I think our goal is to have every business owner be successful here. Not a grandiose vision of something or some romantic notion of something that happened in whatever, 1953 from Back to the Future. But we want everyone to be successful that's here, and we just have to keep that in mind, that we can't overindulge and overcommit, overspend, and leave the next generation paying for.
Todd made a really good point earlier about that this is probably not as much, if, Todd, correct me if I don't say this accurately, it's not as much about the council vision, because councils change. It's about a collaborative vision for what the business owners and the residents and the people want. So I'm just saying, I'm obviously the new guy here, but it ain't my vision. We're trying to figure out and augment what's there. And the more that we can collaborate with people and get ideas on what serves the business as well, what do they want, instead of imposing what I might personally want or somebody else wants. I would just echo that. And so, Todd, if we get off track, come back and help us.
Anytime, call me.
Thanks. Well, for a new guy, you said it very well. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
And thanks, everybody else, for coming. It's an interesting meeting. Or maybe somebody want to hang around and offer some comments or insights to the council or to others to talk. But I appreciate everybody coming in. This is very helpful. With that, unless anybody has anything to add, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.